The tale kicks off with the MC charging at a monster like his life depends on it. He found it in the forest and sliced the slime to pieces in one brutal swing of his sword. Then he wiped the sweat off his face, like he'd fought his own battle and barely won. He glanced at his phone and said he'd tracked something down, finally. After grinding through the quest at last, he snatched the reward. And that's Seienji Ryoma, just an ordinary student. You're probably asking why he's always taking on monsters. So buckle up, because he's about to spill the whole story, step by step. 3 hours ago, back in his home world, he was sprawled in a chair and told everyone, "Weekends are my time. I lock in on my hobbies." Devouring novels, binge-watching cartoons, and crushing video games, and yeah, it worked. This time felt way easier, but he had to cough up a huge chunk of cash, and even then he told himself, yeah, it was still his parents' money. They run one of Japan's biggest corporations, and the rest of his family. They're just as powerful top to bottom. Either doctors or politicians, yet somehow he still blends in so hard he doesn't stand out at all. His cousin never lets up. She roasts him every single chance she gets, and it just keeps piling on. His so-called friend badmouthed him behind his back. Even his own girlfriend dumped him by cheating with another guy, completely ignoring every hurt he was trying to hold in. He can't do a thing about it. Every single thing he owns, even this room, is his parents'. And the worst part, he's never worked a day in his life. Even with part-time work, he'd got nowhere. So he buried the truth about where he came from and chose to live in quiet silence. But every secret slips eventually, and once it's out, people can't stop laughing. They're going to rip him apart for it, because his last name is already all over everyone's tongue. But he'd need to know, for real, what he could pull off once he finally stopped holding back. But yeah, that's basically impossible. Reality's worn him out to the bone. How wild would it be to step into another world? Then it hit me, suddenly. A blinding glow erupted in the room, lighting everything up in an instant. And then a mystery voice cut through the dark and declared his wish had finally been granted. He clapped his hands over his head, bracing for impact, and when it finally stopped, he stumbled into this cracked old building and blared out loud, shouting like the place was holding its breath. He fired back, "Where do you think I was?" Then rushed to the window, spotted a tree, and snapped, "I've been right in the room the whole time." A notification lit up his phone screen, and it hit him like a punch. He stared at it and blurted, "What is this?" He spotted apps like Translator and Inventory. He pulled up the requests, and then a store on his phone popped up, grabbing his attention instantly. He couldn't help but wonder, where in the world did these apps come from? He spotted a new message sitting in his inbox, and he swore the email he used didn't match at all, like the message was trying to throw him off. He said, "Welcome." Then Meshufim, the god of entertainment and pleasure, stepped in, and his prayers got answered right on the spot. And then he got him dumped into this wild new world made of myrrh, so close to what they brag about in his favorite story. Novels, monsters stalk the shadows, and magic burns in the air, and he was. He couldn't believe what he read. Thought it meant he'd finally become a real-time traveler. His wild wish finally came true. Did this feel real, or was it all a dream? The note even warned him he'd only have his phone with him, so he started getting ready right away. It was just enough to help him out, yet that wasn't the whole story. Before they moved him into this world, he had to switch his race to toughen his body against those weird, brutal overloads. Then he sent him off with a grin, wishing him luck and hoping he'd actually enjoy the ride. Journey let his heart lead the charge. With a bright, joyful look, he couldn't help but ask, could it really be true that he's about to travel through a world he'd never even dared to dream about? He can't believe what he's seeing. What's he even going to turn into next? A werewolf, an elf, and somehow it feels like nothing really changed at all. Maybe he can figure it out on his phone, so he opened it. He checked the app with his status, and then his whole world flipped when it flagged his race as a demigod. His jaw dropped so hard he couldn't even breathe, and he instantly swore he'd somehow turned younger too. It's wild, stuff like that almost never happens in games or anime. Take a breather and just fire up a search engine to look up the info. Demigods are a rare race hand-picked by the gods, living on divine blessing, packed with insane strength and a lifespan far beyond humans, but not forever. Previously, in Myr there were only 5 demigods. Then, out of nowhere, a 6th showed up just recently. The protagonist's hands started trembling and he blurted out, "Was this story about me?" It turned out way worse than he ever imagined. If people start digging into his race, they'll make his life here impossible too. He finally calmed down, slid out of bed with a grin, and thought, yeah, I'm really in another world. And if that was true, then time to have some fun. He slipped on the fresh clothes he just pulled from his inventory, and he demanded to know if he'd put them on right. Then he grabbed and picked the rest up too. He hoisted the sword he'd pulled from his inventory, and then he spotted the exact moment he got something new. A fresh notification hit. He snatched his phone, scanned the message, and it read that the dev. He starts the Divine Quest training. Gear up and put on those clothes. He finished equipping his weapons, and the update lit up the screen. 10 divine points, plus a swordsmanship skill. He skimmed the message and muttered that it felt like he'd actually cleared a bunch of quests. Little did he realize it. Yeah, he didn't know it yet, but this place even comes with training. And now he's unlocked a brand new skill, one of his divine points. You can probably use this to snag something useful. Then he dashed out the house, telling himself he'd give it his all. So yeah, he got dropped into another world, but before anything else he had to finish the training went way better than he ever expected. Knocking out quests felt surprisingly easy. Ripping magic stones straight out of the fallen enemies' bodies after the fight. Once the monster went down, it felt like the useful loot just popped into his inventory like it was waiting for him. He was absolutely wiped out, but he pushed through and chose to train again tomorrow. He burned through every reward he got, spending it on a whole bunch of different things. Gear up with your items, power up your skills, and load up the apps that make everything go wild. You know that feeling when someone's been gone forever, and you finally spot them, because they just arrived. He unleashed water magic and blurted, wide-eyed, "Wait, is this magic?" He figured he'd cracked it by flipping through a magic textbook, and now he was praying he'd pull it off. He hurled a water ball straight at the wall, and it barely scratched the surface, didn't even cause real damage. By the wet wall, looking a little stunned, he said it ended up just about like he'd imagined. It still didn't hit hard enough, so he clenched his resolve, steadied his breath, and charged into the next quest. The system lit up and told him his next quest: break out of the forest and sprint straight to the city. Then he tore out of the house, phone in hand, and locked onto the map like it was leading him to something huge. And he suddenly realized he had absolutely no clue where he was heading. He was so desperate to reach the city that he ended up getting completely lost, and now he's stuck wondering, where the heck is he supposed to go next? The sun was sliding toward the horizon, and the sky looked like he'd be stuck out there all night, sleeping under the open sky. He needed to at least spark a fire he'd just spotted. Wolves came charging his way, and he swore they smelled fresh meat on him. They stacked up in huge numbers, and he could barely take it anymore. Everything's pitch dark. He can barely make out a single thing, and then one of the wolves slips into view. Pounced on him like a storm, sinks his teeth into the edge of his sword. He jammed himself through the board, then drove his weapon in two. Aside, he was absolutely painfully. He was absolutely freaking out about this. I swear I thought they were about to wipe him out. God was right there watching him, like the universe itself had its eye on him, Then yeah, he could at least make a real difference. Before he'd been stuck in that non-stop cycle, always, constantly, then something changed. Was cared for and kept safe, but now I can't stay protected. Everything's flipped upside down. He has to handle it solo, because he doesn't even have a soul to call his own. He's going to grab some water and force his mind to picture what kind of power it could unleash. A blazing, unstoppable weapon, then he forged it all into water bullets he launched. Heist charged straight at these monsters, going for the kill. Speed and tore through the fight, slaughtering every last one of them. Monsters surged in on him from every side. He was stunned by what just happened, stumbled to the ground and stared at his shaking hand. He'd called for help. He finally steadied himself, then flashed a happy grin and said he'd managed to handle it all on his own. After a while, he burst onto the path where people walked and demanded, "So you really got out of the thicket, huh?" He bowed to the two people strolling past him, convinced they were from some entirely different race. I can't help wondering, are there people around here? Then a cart rattles past him. A man shouted at him, saying he looked beat to pieces and that the city of Phillies sat right ahead, straight in front of him. The MC stared him down and said, "Yeah, that checks out." He jabbed at his cart and told him, "Hop in, I'll give you a ride," then added, "But if you walk, you won't reach there in a single day." He wrestled with it. Yeah, this felt great, but could he actually trust this guy? If push came to shove, he'd pull out magic to defend himself, and now he'd trust his word, so he bowed deep and thanked him for the offer. He sprinted up to his cart, and right when he got there, a guy showed up, greeted him like they'd known each other, and asked straight up if he was traveling. He shot his hand out and declared, "We're the ones guarding the cargo right here. I'm Roma, nice to meet you." Beside him, a girl leaned in and said, "I'm Permy." Ryoma grabbed his hand, told him his name, and flashed a grin. "I'm really glad to meet you." The coachman spun around, shouted his name, and ordered him to scramble aboard fast, because they were about to ride out. They rode side by side, and he blurted out that meant he was heading straight to Thales too. Where the heck did he come from? He shouted his name like a threat, right in the middle of the... Coon blurted that he'd rolled in from the west, and then shot. So, where's that guy even from? With a warm, friendly grin, he said, "You can just call me by my fur." Name, they grew up in a nearby village and couldn't stay put, so they set out for adventure. She's his childhood friend and a wind mage, and she... His stomach growled so loud it felt like a warning bell, and he admitted he was starving. Dinner time, he yanked a strip of dried meat out of the bag. He snapped his name to get his attention and asked, straight up, if he was hungry. He conjured water with magic, politely refused, and said that he'd rather gulp down water, so when they saw what was right in front of them, everyone's jaw dropped. He praised him to the heavens, and she shot back, asking if he was a magician. He blinked, totally thrown off, and said, "Nah, I'm just an ordinary try." The traveler leaned in, and she told her he had just whipped up that water out of thin air. Only the most skilled sorcerers can cast spells without ever speaking a single word, and honestly, it's mind-blowing. The protagonist jolted with surprise, like the textbook skipped this whole part and didn't warn him at all. The coachman spun around, stunned. "Wait, your water mages. Because water is priceless and getting it is brutally hard. Without the water mages, they'd be forced to haul supplies up mountains. So yeah, he's genuinely grateful for them." He grinned and admitted it was pretty awesome, then burst into laughter, convinced they were dead wrong to call him a wizard. But he wouldn't budge, and after a while they finally rolled up to the city of Thales. And the coachman finally blurted, "We're here." Then he snapped his head around the city, taking it all in with wide eyes. A grin lit up his face like he'd just realized, this is what a city in another world looks like. It's like the whole world's buzzing. This is where you'd totally expect a weapon shop, and yeah, everywhere is packed with people. The coachman leaned in and asked what he planned to do next, and the MC grinned. First, he'd help them out as a thank you. They slammed into the right building, right on the money. Right after they dumped every last bit of cargo, the man shot him a grateful nod and said, "That's it, looks like we're done." "So does he have a place to crash?" He told me he hadn't picked where he was sleeping yet. He said, "Then let me introduce you to someone," and Roma shot back, "If you need anything, just contact us." They worked their whole lives in this city, so a reunion was inevitable. He nodded, they shook hands, and just like that, they said their goodbyes. Why, next thing, he stormed up to the building and declared it had to be the exact same Hotel Lunas had been talking about. He stepped inside, and the employee straight up let him through, saying he was his friend. After that, he promised him a discount, then stumbled back to his room, flopped onto the bed, and groaned that he was totally wiped out. With a grin, he realized he'd had an amazing time. So he took in the beautiful city, learned the ropes of magic, and even snagged a couple solid new acquaintances. He snapped back to the training, yanked out his phone, and saw the message. Boom, the job was done. Leaving the forest and heading to the city was officially cleared. Then another perk hit his hands. A reward bag, and the text teased it was way roomier than it ever looked at first glance. He somehow managed to cram his entire sword into that tiny bag, then shrugged like it was no big deal. Apparently everyone here carries stuff like this. He didn't want to bring the gear out in front of everyone, so the bag fit him perfectly. Then he stared at his phone and shot, "All right, what's next on the list?" Ryoma spotted his next training mission. Register with the Adventurers Guild, and pure excitement lit up his face. And he realized, holy crap, there were even guilds here. That was the truth he finally clicked into place. A whole other world. Yeah, it was probably way too late now, so he'd have to bite the weight and try again tomorrow. But rage bubbled in him already, and the next morning he strode through the city, convinced the guild was right around the corner, just like he'd felt. It should be right about here. Then he spotted the perfect building, pushed the door open, and slipped inside. Was totally blown away by what he saw, and he fully bought into it like it was the real Adventurers Guild. This was insane. Roma clocked him instantly, waved like she'd been waiting, and said this is how it all went down. Then he closed the distance and approached him and, "So does that mean he's an adventurer now too?" Denied it flat out, insisting he hadn't even had a second to fully take it in. He jabbed a finger to the side and told him to come with him, right then. He would help, and the employee smiled. "Welcome to the Adventurers Guild branch here in Thales City, Phaland Kingdom. Renee's the one who signs the newbies up, and now she has to check his status so she can add him to the list." He has to slap his hand onto the magic ball. When the protagonist stares at it, it hits him like a revelation. So this is what the thing really is. With this, she'll finally uncover what he's truly like. His skills, his strengths, everything. And just like that, the real truth about his race will be exposed. She caught the hesitation in his eyes and blurted, "Is something wrong?" He shot back, "Give me a minute, please wait a bit." He bit his lip and realized, if he backed out now, he wouldn't make it through the training at all. He let out a heavy sigh and told her, straight up, not to act shocked by the result. He shot his hand forward and realized, with no real choice left, this was the only move. The second he made contact with the ball, a blast of blinding energy lit up the entire guild hall. Fear started to creep in and the people around him snapped. "Wait, what's that? Did something really happen, or are you just imagining things?" She shot him a worried look, trembling with questions, and he went white-knuckled nervous, then whispered that he needed her to keep it secret. She clung to her secret for one last second, then her anger eased. She told them, "Let's go to another room." He dropped onto the sofa in the room they'd brought him to and started thinking, like he was sure he knew what was coming. I was relieved there weren't any special problems, but this whole thing still turned into a total hassle. Renee dragged a man up to him and announced, "This is Jamal, the guild's boss." She told him, straight up, that a demigod wanted in on his guild, and the MC stared at him like he already knew this would end exactly like this. He stepped closer, voice shaky, and asked, should he really go check if it was true? No pressure, of course. He just wanted to know if they could skip the whole formalities thing. She shot her hand toward the magic ball and ordered him to press his palm right onto it. It would give way more accurate results. He slapped his hand on the ball, and the whole room erupted in a fresh burst of blinding light, which left him completely stunned. He dropped to his knees and roared, loud enough to shake the whole room. Said he got accepted. He'd hand him the license on the spot. So when he saw that, confusion hit hard and he blurted that he should stand up. He blurted out that he was terrified, swearing he had no right to disrespect him. Renee swallowed her pride, apologized, and demanded to know if it was really true. So if a divine blessing can actually be proven, there's no way around it. There should be some kind of mark sitting on his body. He started ripping through his own body, staring at every inch like, wait, is this really me? His phone suddenly buzzed with a notification, and when he yanked it out, his heart leapt. He swore it was a message from Mesufim. He told them his divine mark had appeared on his shoulder blade, and once he read it, a weird jolt hit him, like he'd somehow grown even more used to it. Jumal jabbed the phone with his finger and blurted out, totally lost, "What the heck is this supposed to be?" He claimed it was a gift from God, some kind of blessing. Then said the divine mark sat just under his shoulder, at least that's what Mesufim swore, and they were practically vibrating with excitement, begging him to show it to her. She needs to cool off, right now. She's a woman after all, so how could she have totally forgotten about it? Only he could watch, and he admitted it. Undressing in front of a girl felt downright shameful. Jamal burst out in loud support and told her to stop bothering the gentleman and to leave the room. She was furious, couldn't take it anymore, and stormed out of the room right after. He yanked his shirt open and bared his back. Right there, the mark stared back at him. He stepped back and said the last doubt was gone. He swallowed hard, leaned in, and said, "Wait," but then his words cut off before he could finish. To finally greet him the right way. He pressed a hand to his chest and thundered, "Welcome to the guild." Then he fired off a message to headquarters right away, and filed for a special license for him. Ryoma couldn't help but feel a jolt of surprise. He insisted a normal license would be enough, then slammed the brakes. Nope, he refused, saying they had brutally strict rules. The Adventurers Guild has been standing strong for over 800 years, built by Ryotaro Sumeragi, an apostle of the god of creation, and he still held unquestioned authority, but the moment he heard it, surprise hit hard, so he snapped, "What did you say?" "Wait, another demigod." He blinked, half confused, because just by the name it screamed Japanese all over the place. Renee stormed back into the room and blurted out that she was sorry for making them wait. He handed over his personal card, started scanning it, and then she cut in. "This will open up an X." It gave him a bigger toolbox of powers, and then let him chat and coordinate with the other apostles too. The card burst into a blinding glow, flashing a hologram so real it felt like it could step right out. Caro burst onto the scene, declaring him a brand new demigod, and then said he was. He was thrilled to meet him, and you could tell this guy had already heard his name because he was the guild's founder. The protagonist stared at him, shocked, and his mind snapped, wait, this is the guild founder. He's insanely young, yet they said demigods aren't immortal. The hologram started waving like crazy and blurted, "Can you hear me, or is the connection messed up?" And he just stood there, completely thrown off. He named himself and said meeting him made him genuinely happy. Then he smiled back and asked, "So you're a new apostle, right?" He was banking on a long-term partnership, and then I asked, "So what kind of god drags you into this world?" He smirked and said, "Mesufim, the god of entertainment and pleasure." With a confused twitch in his face, he snapped something sarcastic about how lucky he is, then shut his mouth because he can't say a single thing. Long ago, he founded the Adventurers Guild, so people could storm the dungeons his god spat into the world for fun. It was one slip away from toppling the entire world into chaos. He snapped his gaze away and said it felt like he had to bolt, then tossed, "We'll talk again later." He waved with a warm grin and promised, "We'll see each other again." The hologram blinked out, and he immediately felt like that was the most chaotic start ever, like he'd just stumbled into the life of someone with zero free time. Jumel said the registration was finally finished. From now on, Renee would be his personal assistant, and if he ever needed something, he could reach her or him straight away. The MC agreed, and then he headed back down the hall, stunned that it took way longer than he ever figured. Roma sat down at the table and finally blurted, "I'm free at last." Then his face tightened. Wait, did something go wrong? They stirred up such chaos that even the bald psycho got yanked in, and when he showed up, he told them everything was under control. He'd already been given his license, and no incidents had happened. He smiled and said he was relieved to hear that, so what's his next move? He admitted he'd probably start with something simple then. They dragged him to the order board, and he blurted out, Then he had better start by hunting down medicinal herbs right away. Most of these herbs sprout right on the forest's edge, so he'd snag them fast. If he wanted, he could even pitch in, and when Permy stepped up too, he thanked them both. He stared at the task, then blurted out, "Turns out there someone's got a monster hunt mission," so he asked, "Wait, are you talking about Frida Vogel?" She told her that once he tightened his rein, he'd pull this task off no matter what. He had zero idea what any of it meant, and that confusion hit him hard. And Roma told him this guild had a secret ranking system, crush enough quests, and he'd rocket straight to the top spots faster than anyone. And the higher the rank you climb, the deadlier the missions, and yeah, the rewards get bigger too. Rehoma nodded and promised he'd go all in, and everyone said that was commendable. They struck a deal and promised to go all in, then headed straight for the counter. He called out to Mr. Himmel, saying he'd requested the job, and named the two of them before asking, "So, you two want to go catch some monsters?" He refused outright, jabbed a finger back, and declared, "Not today, we're helping a friend." He stared at him and fired off, "So you're new here?" And when he nodded, he slid his name over, saying he'd just registered. He was stunned by what he heard and blurted, "Wait, THAT Apostle." He burst into laughter, still confused, then nodded like, "Yeah, right," wondering if everyone already knew. He dropped to one knee and barked that he'd have to wait, then promised he'd call in another employee, while the others stood beside him, staring with blank, puzzled faces. Right after that, Renee slid up to them and blurted out that she was sorry for the delay. Then she pushed them to grab the herb collection quest, but only after they flashed their personal cards. The protagonist figured that the moment someone saw his card, the truth about who he really was would hit them instantly. He was ready to spill the whole truth to them, but Roma spun around and shouted his name before he could even finish the thought. He finally wrapped up his thoughts and yanked his card out of the bag. They both witnessed it and froze in total disbelief. Shock rippled through their bodies as they started trembling. She shot him a confident smile, whispered, "Good luck," and made it sound like everything really was fine. He strode up to him, yelled his name, and demanded, "So you're really a demigod?" He snapped with worry over what had just happened and blurted, "Is this a nasty surprise?" Then he apologized right away, insisting he never meant to deceive them. He figured that from here on out, they'd steer clear of him completely, and maybe even start hating him. Right before he left, he asked, "Should we just ditch this quest?" He shut that idea down fast and snapped back that nobody cared who he was. Once they chose to help, they'd ride with him all the way to the end. He couldn't believe it. He snapped their names out loud, stunned, and told them that he'd been depending on them all along. After that, they tore out of the city, and then he said, "That's how it all went down, one wild, long story." He finally rose into demigod status, but only just recently it turned out he'd ended up in Mer, and I'm still reeling. He doesn't get a ton of things yet, so he leans in, asks them to teach him everything they know, and waits on pins and needles for their answer. And Roman nodded and promised, "If anything blocks your path, we'll be right there to help you crush it." MC steps up and thanks them, right on the spot. He shot his fist up over his head and roared that this quest had to be finished. No excuses. Later, they burst into a clearing, and Per climbed out of the moment to say that. The one herb they needed showed up with heart-shaped leaves, like it was begging to be found. He nodded like he finally got it, and promised he'd hunt this down right now. He strode ahead and warned himself not to stop scanning his surroundings, because if he blinked, the monsters would jump him when he least expected it. Then he nodded, agreeing. He went on a herb hunt, then pressed them for one thing. Could they really gather 11 kinds of herbs in just 2 hours? Turns out it was way harder than he ever imagined. It'd be way easier if someone had a map with clear marks. Right then, a monster tore through the air toward him, screaming a brutal roar that shook everything. He thought it was a disaster. He'd left his sword sitting in his inventory, and Roma sped off way too fast. He sprinted right at him, shouted a warning about the danger, and smashed the monster back with a brutal sword strike. He whipped around, worry written all over his face, and demanded to know if he was okay. He stared the monster down and realized it was Frida Vogel, one of those same monsters, so Rehoma snapped, "Let's run." He bolted away, shouting that it was over. Then they realized they were fully surrounded. Permy snapped up from the side and unleashed a spell, and sent a furious gust of wind, blasting the monster out of its tracks. She blurted, "Are you okay?" And then he snapped her name, telling her she'd saved them and that he knows water magic so he can strike back. He said, voice shaking with worry, that he wasn't sure he could pull it off. He flashed a confident grin and told him, "Let's take down these monsters together." Those words lit a spark of confidence in him. He steadied his nerves and nodded, agreeing without hesitation. She warned them she'd whip up a stream of wind to snag the monster's attention, then immediately started casting her spell. He started conjuring water, and if he wasn't careful, he feared he'd accidentally slam it into them. So he had to lock in and focus. Then Roma flashed the signal, and she unleashed a fierce burst of wind the moment it happened, which slammed the monsters down to the ground. He sprinted straight at the crashing monsters and started to. With razor-fast sword strikes, he cut them down, then spun around and snapped the protagonist's name. Name heard it and rained down a barrage of water bullets, smashing into multiple monsters at once. Overjoyed by it, they rushed up to him and blurted out, grinning, "We did it, we succeeded." He shot them a baffled look, and then Roma grinned and told him, like, "Man, you should have seen it. How insanely cool I wiped out those monsters with my magic." He said something else right after he got the go-ahead. He told him to be himself and stop shrinking in fear, because, yeah, he'd said that exact thing himself. They fought shoulder to shoulder, and from that moment they were sealed as comrades. Permy nodded and told him, "You're dead right." Hearing that, a grin broke across his face. Yeah, they were comrades for real now. He shrugged and said, "So be it." Then they tore back to the guild building. He thanked them again, then told them straight up he'd be staying in Thales for a while, so he'd drop by the guild a lot. And if they needed him, they didn't have to wait. They could call him instantly. Roma nodded, shot him a quick wave, and told him they had to head out. Then she waved again and promised she couldn't wait for their next meet. He fired back a quick nod, then snapped, "Goodbye," and watched them go. And he sprinted back to his hotel room, right on the heels of everything that just happened, and then, there. He dropped onto the bed and leaned in, asking how the training was going. He yanked out his phone and stared at the message, boom, the 12th step. Accept and complete one quest for the Adventures Guild was officially done. And as a reward, 10 glorious divine points poured into his Man of Recovery skill. He kept scrolling through the quest list and asked, "Am I almost done?" Then he froze. One quest screamed a massive reward. The final step was simple, go to the temple and pray, and it promised 1,000 divine points, plus the Gate of Movement skill. Holiness climbs by +1, he gets the Game Master title and a fresh upgrade, then his eyes widen at the screen. Wait, why do I even need all this? He mutters, maybe he should just check it on the browser. He said apostles who live in holiness pull off insane feats, win the believers' praise, and level up their power until they're strong enough to become gods themselves. Then he read it and snapped. So you're telling me Mesufim really wanted me to become a god? What? He'd rather stay an ordinary traveler, but the temple still pulls him in. After that, he stormed into the temple, eyes scanning ahead, looking to. He just stood there, baffled, thinking. He'd shown up, but now what? How was he even supposed to pray? You gotta step into the same rhythm everyone else is chasing. He dropped to his knees and pleaded to God in his head, begging him to hear him. Right in the blink of an eye, he vanished and reappeared in a place he'd never seen before. He blurted, "Where do you think you're going?" And Mesufim was, perched on the column right beside him. His hand shot up, calling him by name, and he greeted him with a grin. Ryoma stepped right up to him and demanded to know, was he the god who had summoned him? And with a breath of relief, he finally got the yes he wanted. He demanded to know why he'd been dragged into this world, stared him down, and fired back. "You wanted this, didn't you?" So he stepped in and made it happen because all he wanted was to put on the best show imaginable. Because it's him, you know it hits different, and you can pour your heart into every second. And he'll watch it all unfold and celebrate right alongside him. We'll finally get to see each other again. Right after that, it hit him. Suddenly he found himself. Inside the temple, he whipped his head up and, staring at his statue, he nodded like it was a promise, and he agreed. Lifted his chin with a grin that lit up his face. Agreed to have fun, no masks, just from the heart, as he had confessed it to him. Then he bolted out of the temple and caught sight of the. He sent that message, and it hit him that, yeah, it really felt like he was watching him. He stared at the quests, then snapped, training S done. Now it was time for him to grab the reward he'd earned. The second he snatched it, the phone in his hands. A fierce glow erupted from his hand, then the phone vanished into thin air. Weird magic burned a mark into his palm, and he froze, staring at it in shock, then blurting out a question. What just happened? 1 second the phone was gone, the next it was back in his hand, and he thought he had it all figured out. Now it all clicked without effort, just a simple thought, and suddenly he didn't have to fear losing his phone ever again. This was crazy convenient. He stared at the system window, and suddenly, he finally got what upgrade really meant. He'd hunt for what fresh stuff just dropped, then he ripped open the quest. He slid up and told me it unlocked new quests, plus fresh daily quests dropping every day. That part didn't take long to get used to. First, he had to crush 5 monsters. He'd mix business with pleasure, snatch a fresh quest from the guild like always, because the training was finally over. After that moment, it was time to stop messing around and get down to business for real. And right then, the protagonist showed up and came to a halt in his tracks at the. He rallied up with the guild and snatched a quest to wipe out 10 goblins. Then everything changed. He trekked into the forest, wiped out a handful of goblins, and then smugly bragged that taking a couple down was basically effortless for him. He doesn't like pulling magic stones from them, but the quest won't budge unless he does. Then, out of nowhere, someone beside him screams for help. He heard it the second it hit the air, sprinted straight toward the voice, and spotted a group of. As a pack of wolves closes in on a young man, ready to tear him apart. He whipped up water bullets in, to launch an all-out assault, and drive these monsters running in fear. He leaned toward him and shouted, "Is he okay?" But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. To stash a healing potion somewhere safe. He yanked the potion from his inventory and dumped it out. Poured it down his throat. Thanks to that, his injuries started. Quickly healed, and just like that, he started feeling better the moment his recovery kicked in as he ray. When he finally came to, Ruin, this brand new traveler opened his eyes and said he was beyond grateful for the help. The MC dropped his name and basically told them, "Don't thank me. Seriously, you don't have to." With a bright grin, he told him, "I saved your life, now let me repay you." He dug in his heels again, then shouted that he'd do anything for it. He stared at him, totally thrown off, because this dude clearly wasn't planning to back off anytime soon. He leaned in and asked what he thought about teaming up and playing a game together. With permission finally granted, he reached into his bag and started to pull it out. Slow, deliberate, like the moment was about to explode. Now that everything played out like this, he figured he could pull off the impossible. 1 move, 2 victories. He just had to test it out, because the game master skill is straight up part of the god of entertainment's power. You can take any win you want, but if you lose, whatever was on the line gets snatched away by force. And because you've got this power, you can spot and expose every cheater out there. Whether he chooses to use it is totally up to him. He flashed a coin, grinned, and announced, "Let's do a coin toss, easy rules, no tricks." To see if it would land heads or tails, he snatched the coin out of the air and demanded, "So what are you wagering on?" Ruin flipped for heads, but he bet on the wrong side and made the opposite choice. Then he leaned on this power straight into the next move. After that, he lifted his hand off the coin cover and blurted that he figured he'd. Dread disappeared, thrill lit a fire in his eyes, and he begged, "Can we play again?" Ryoma nodded, and for the first time he thought he finally got it. It flipped to tails at first, but he snatched it back and forced it to land on heads, because in the end the whole game swings on nothing but him. Now he's setting his sights on winning 5 times straight, because if he can pull that off, he'll finally learn whether he's truly able to battle on his own. He demanded to know why they wouldn't gamble, so he tossed his bet on a magic stone, and when it came to that, he didn't flinch at all, saying he'd wager a whole pile of medicinal herbs instead. Then he picked asterisk tails and flipped that coin like it was destiny. He flashed the coin, yelled that it landed tails, and declared he'd just won. Right after it happened, a magic stone burst into Ruin's hands, and he threw it all in with that bet. He swore this was the exact stone he'd bet on, and in his mind it meant one thing. Whatever the condition was, it would get ripped away by force. The stone dropped straight into his hands, power so dangerous it could cut him as fast as it could help, so he'd better use it with perfect timing. He thanked him for the game, saying that was all the gratitude he needed. Then he got hit with surprise, shouted, "Wait, is that it?" Only to be met with a firm refusal. This still isn't enough. Then he pulls out a magic stone and says he can finally calm down. They head back to the city, and right after that, both of them rush straight back to the guild building, where he handed over the magic crystals as proof he'd wiped out the goblins. Ruin called him out, demanding answers. Did he have? So was his report done yet? Could they grab lunch together? He nodded, then ordered a bunch of dishes and declared the food here was ridiculously tasty. And yeah, the rooms here are cheap as hell. So this inn is a total jackpot for a beginner like him. He even calls it wonderful, so odds are he won't go hunting for another place and will just stay put here. He leaned in and asked if they could split the room rent, and then they finally made it to their room and dropped onto their beds, all set to breathe and brace for what came next. He pulled out his phone and figured, yes, now I can cash in quest rewards, because he'd stacked up a mountain of divine points and couldn't wait to level up his magic power. He caught his attention, then straight up called him over, fired off the question, "What is this, some kind of magical device?" He nodded and figured the magical device talk was real. He meant every word just like they. "Use it in the guild?" He blurted out, stunned at his own words, like he couldn't believe what he'd just said. He couldn't help thinking, I gotta get something like that too. Leaning in with a grin, he pitched his idea and asked, "So, how about a part-time job?" Ruin didn't get it, so he shot back, "What do you mean?" He claimed it was a real quest. He'd hunt goblins and then rip out whatever he came for. They'd snatch those magic stones, sell them off, and split the cash right down the middle. With a bright grin, he nodded and said, "Don't worry, I just need to update my gear." So when that offer hit the table, there was no way he could say no. He grinned at the news and told them, "Perfect, then we start tomorrow." Then he crashed into sleep, phone in hand, scrolling through quests like he was already planning his next move. By morning, he fully expected to grab his gear and hit the hunt without wasting a second. With a stash of divine points stacked so high, he couldn't help thinking, getting fresh skills would be the next big upgrade. He unleashed fire, wind, and earth magic, and at the same time he steadily fed his mana, growing it a little with every breath. Right after that, energy surged through his body, and then he realized he couldn't believe it. He could actually feel his strength surging like it was growing by the second, and for now, that felt like plenty. Suddenly, an app called **Fairy Garden * snatched his attention, and he cracked it open. He opened the app and blurted, shocked, that it looked exactly like a mobile game. This app came packed with tabs for everything: fairy lists, gotcha pulls, your inventory, and the store. He stared at it, then said, "I've got one free spin. And yeah, it's basically a Tamagotchi, isn't it?" He used it and boom, he popped out a level 1 fairy king with no name at all. He grinned like he'd just hit the jackpot and said, "This guy has to be ridiculously rare." Then he paused, what should I name him? And his thoughts went off mid-sentence. He thought of. From this moment on, everyone calls him Phonon. He caught the fairy king lighting up with joy and said it was like the name totally clicked with him. So he's trying to hand him something. Wait, could it be that fairy island grass? A glowing figure just appeared right before his eyes, and he blurted, "Wait," in pure shock. Could he really pull this off, actually hand it over and still get something back? His grin said yes, all right. And wait, is that Yggdrasil I'm seeing? The next morning, Ruin popped awake and shot the MC a cheerful good morning. And the MC nearly choked. Could it be? He really had been awake playing this whole night. Then they stormed out of the inn and he announced, "I'm going to slaughter goblins." He said his goodbye and promised that for now he'd finish a few errands around the city. Later, he pushed into the forest and a wild thought hit him. He thought that the map marked every spot where monsters came for people. Somewhere in this place, a goblin nest is hiding, right where he came. He landed in the right spot, spotted the goblins, and blurted out that this was exactly what he'd been hunting for. He reckoned there were a ton of goblins around, but every last one of them was pathetically weak. He'd lure them all into one place, then swing in with a single, devastating strike. He hurled a storm of magical projectiles and wiped out 2 goblins in seconds. The moment the other monsters spotted him, they surged forward in a roar, and he instantly figured, oh no, we're done. The moment they closed in, he fired off his magic and ripped a whole forest of stakes right out of the ground. He shot down a huge pack of goblins on the spot, then grinned like, man, that was way too easy. When he spotted a giant monster lurking among them, shock hit him so hard he blurted, "Is this some kind of boss?" Massive goblins shrieked at the top of their lungs and sprinted straight for him. He shot his hand up and barked, loud and clear, that he wouldn't quit so easily. Then he blasted a brutal stream of wind right at the monster. He surged away and smashed the goblin with a brutal strike, blasting it out for good. And the damage he left behind was devastating because now. Is that it? He was already shaking with fear, so he yanked out his phone and swore he'd handle the corpses later. For now, he shoved it into his inventory. Because what if this massive goblin was never a goblin at all, but a hobgoblin hiding in plain sight? If that goblin walked away and left the nest alone, more goblins would crawl out and multiply like crazy. That choice would unleash disaster. There's no way around it, and he'll have to handle this for the greater good. So yeah, he goes straight for the power he got yesterday, no hesitation. He slammed down divine magic that blanketed a huge stretch of land right in front of him, just like earlier, when he'd received a divine magic warning hit. Light streams powerful enough to blast back any attack and even knit back broken, injured bodies. Wounds and illnesses gone right with it. And once you sanctify any place, no monster dare step inside. Truth is, this kind of power is reserved for gods alone. He stared at it in pure, jaw-dropping amazement, and they declared this place is sacred now, like the very air got purified, and honestly, it's incredible. He crushed the quest, snagged telekinesis as his reward, and right then and there, he had to test it immediately. Using that power, he hurled it skyward, and right there. So he gasped in shock as his sword hovered in the air, like it had a mind of its own. You just have to picture its magic power, like, right in your mind, and everything clicks. Power snaps into place around the object, and he snapped into motion, swung the sword like lightning and drove the blade in, straight for the kill. He slammed it straight into the tree, then kept swinging the sword. With a bright smile blazing across his face, he couldn't stop thinking, this is the most fun ever. Now he's ready to wreck foes, without even laying a finger on the weapon. He glanced up and saw the sky swallowing the light, so he snapped, that's it, time to call it a day, and the next day. He stumbled into the forest soaked in ruin and snapped that they should stop, right around here. He yanked out his phone, flashed a whole pile of goblin corpses on screen and set. So they knew teaming up would let them wrap it up way faster, then they'd move on. After that, they started prying magic stones right out of the goblins' bodies. Then he snapped his gaze to the side, stunned and blurted. So that's a hobgoblin, right? Ryoma nodded hard, then said it was his nests he'd crushed. He blurted it out in shock. Turns out he wasn't new at all. He was a full-on veteran, and he'd wiped out an entire crowd of monsters all by himself. He shrugged and said it wasn't hard at all. He just stayed back and fired off magic from a distance. He was still in awe and basically couldn't believe it, then admitted, yeah, his stomach was starting to growl. That he snatched some berries on the way, fresh fuel he could munch right then. When they were done, he started warming up. Said they were finally finished, and all that was left was to hit the city and unload the goods to the guild. Ruin swore he couldn't even picture how much money they were about to rake in. Then they burst into the guild. The worker said, altogether, we racked up 2,132 binoculars. The protagonist handed him half of that and said, that was his share. He beamed, thanked him with pure joy and said that with this kind of money, he could finally replace every piece of gear he owned. Then Gmail rang. He grabbed him and asked, can we talk for a minute? Because he had something big to drop on him. He nodded along, and then his mind started racing. What in the world was going to happen next? It looked seriously bad. He spun toward Ruin, blurted out an apology, and told him he couldn't wait because he was going to be late. Right after they stepped into the room, he leaned in and asked, so what do you actually want to talk about? He said they'd gotten a letter from King Ruillo, and he couldn't wait to finally meet him. He was absolutely stunned by heard he say the king? Yeah, like wait, the king. Does your majesty want to summon him right now? MC fired back, so you want me to beg, do you even plan to agree? He told them right off the bat that as a demigod his status outranked the king's, and even if that was true, he didn't think it was right to just refuse. If he wanted to live and work in peace in this kingdom, he'd better not even think about. Rage burned inside him, but he still had to face the ruler first, so he agreed to the meeting and asked, what about the day after tomorrow, right around noon? He figured he'd need a little time to steel himself. Jamal grinned and promised he'd handle everything, telling him to come back to the guild when he felt ready. Then he bowed, agreed, and practically gushed that he was truly grateful for all the help. He strode down the busy city street, convinced that landing a royal audience was the kind of big moment that could change everything. He showed up at the inn, and a worker immediately asked if he'd come searching for the young man he'd been looking for. That gentleman was waiting for him upstairs, so he climbed in, only to find him already out cold, and somehow it looked like he'd even rented the room just for them. The next morning he woke up, after doing one unbelievably kind thing. Oh, by the way, who is he supposed to be? Nobody ever told him, not once. Ever watched a guild leader look someone in the eye and speak with pure respect? Rihoma yanked his card from his bag, and right as it came free, he caught himself thinking that. Telling him the truth right away felt like the best move. And when he finally saw it, his jaw dropped so hard he nearly couldn't speak, asking me in pure shock. So yeah, he's that new apostle, and he just broke into laughter in total confusion, saying he doesn't put much importance on it. Ruin's nerves shredded the moment he heard the news, like his whole world was about to snap. Then he shouted that he was a great apostle and dismissed all the ceremony, telling him there was no need to fuss like that and that he could just go back to calling him the old way. After everything, they're friends now. His eyes burned with tears and he told him, "I won't treat you like a stranger." He'll be drowning in loneliness, and he just couldn't take it anymore. He blurted out a loud yes and told him, "Don't look at me like that, only I get to be the one staring." Grinning with relief, he said, and then he asked, "From now on, he's gonna call him by his name, and hey, it's fine, right?" He blurted a loud yes, but only if that guy returned the favor and called him by. He nodded, then asked if they could grab something to eat. Ruin said he'd be totally down, but first they had to take care of that one thing, and then, bam, they hit the weapons shop where the protagonist stared in shock like, "Whoa, there's all this here." His eyes were darting all over the place. Then he stormed up to the sword rack and asked if he could help him pick gear. He agreed, and he couldn't believe it. This place had a ridiculously good selection. So Ruin started flipping through all the different kinds. He stepped right up to him and asked what he liked. Then he turned toward him. He looked at him like he was stuck in a storm of choices and said he just couldn't decide which sword to buy. Eyes narrowed, thinking hard. He had zero clue about what was going on. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger slid right up to them. He jabbed a finger to the side and told them that sword over there was the better move, and then they snapped their heads toward him. He grinned when he spotted Roma and blurted out if he was hunting for a new weapon too. Roma nodded and said his old sword snapped while he was fighting the orcs. He introduced them face to face and bragged that he was an adventurer, then waved his good friend over and trailed off like the next part was about to explode. Could he really help him grab the right gear? He just wasn't sure he could pull it off. He nodded and said, "If I were you, I'd grab a small round shield or iron bracers, whatever helps you defend yourself." Ru-In made the call, a shield first, and if he wanted to charge in, bracers next, so he grabbed the bracers, thanked him for the tip, and he said, "Great," and promised he'd buy them right then. Then MC stared at his bracers and muttered that he could use a fresh pair himself. Those were totally worn out. He grinned and said he didn't have the money for new ones yet, then swore he'd buy them only after the current pair finally fell apart. He grinned and said he should just let it happen, then he'll be good. He demanded a gift for saving his friend, then froze in shock when he heard, "It's not worth doing all that." He brushed it off and snapped that they needed reliable gear, because he wasn't about to let his friend get hurt. He nodded with a puzzled face, thanked him like it finally made sense, and then he marched up to Ruin and demanded a couple vials of healing potion, then added, "Use them smart, no wasting a drop." He shot him a grateful nod and promised he wouldn't throw it away thoughtlessly. Then they took off, and he immediately called Roma to ask if they were grabbing food next. Fine, eat, would he actually want to tag along? He nodded fast, grinning, and said he'd already got the perfect spot in mind. Meet up with Perm first, then head straight there. Then they finally caught up with her and slipped into the place they were headed for, sat down at the table, and Roma took a quick look around. This place felt seriously cozy. To be honest, he felt weird just sitting there. Then he grabbed the menu and realized that while he'd been in every local tavern seemed to live on meat. He leaned in like, "Wait, what are they serving here?" Then he spotted those onigiri, froze in shock, and blurted, "What is it?" And honestly, you could tell he couldn't stop thinking about why it hit him so hard. Perm had clearly been expecting this. She broke into a satisfied laugh and grinned, saying she had zero doubt he'd instantly see and appreciate the uniqueness of the dish. This place was built by the apostle Hana Higuchi herself. She crafted a whole lineup of dishes, started the restaurant, and raked in serious money. He kept staring at the menu and the question hit him, "Wait, she's Japanese too?" Suddenly everything clicked about the onigiri. Comes from, later they ordered. Their food and every dish they ordered were dropped right in front of them, and they couldn't believe it, utter shock on their faces. When they spotted the dishes they'd ordered with their own hands, their eyes lit up. I swear they said it was pure mind-blowing perfection. Ruin hunched over his plate, started devouring, and then blurted out, "So what's the deal with this? That steak is so tender it feels unreal. Like, is it even real meat?" And she's not stopping there. She says that sandwich is amazing too. With a grin full of satisfaction, the protagonist dug into his food, and he still couldn't believe that what was happening felt so real. This world served up pure heaven. Just look at the pasta. He said it was delicious. She called Hannah a genius, and everyone else couldn't stop grinning over their own dishes. And with a grin, he thought, looks like they're absolutely thrilled. He wished life had more moments like this, so he waved her over and asked what she'd been up to today. Permy smiled and said she'd been studying sacred magic at the temple, the kind that could heal any sickness. He told her, if that's the case, I'll fight at full power to protect you. But she looked a little uneasy and said, I just don't want you burning yourself out. He wrecked the vibe and said he'd love to have comrades like. He asked them, why couldn't he join too? When that question hit, he froze, then pushed again, saying he was new and wondering if it was even possible. He grinned and told them, trust me, I was a newbie once too, so don't sweat it. We'll do this together. He couldn't hold it in. Joy exploded in him, and he shouted loud. He was overwhelmed with gratitude and promised he'd give it everything. And the MC, wearing a bright, joyful smile, listened close and thought. Permy suddenly remembered him being so gentle and sensitive, so she called and asked, did you finally master divine magic? Because only apostles can use it. It doesn't just heal wounds, it also breaks curses. She even heard that it could summon angels and bring the dead back to life, and that left Roma stunned. He blurted out that question like, wait, can it really do all of that? Just when they thought things would quiet down, the people nearby started buzzing with the same talk. Ryoma shoved his chair back and stood up, telling them, we've been sitting here for a while. Then he missed them. After that, they headed to a daisy. Deserted place, she blurted, apologizing through clenched nerves. That she never should have brought it up right there in the restaurant. He stood right there, then threw out a sincere apology. He stayed cool and told them to chill, because there was zero anger in him. They didn't have to stress about it, because that's just how it. And sure enough, next time, they'd hand him yet another banger. Cafe, just like that, everyone felt lighter, and she nodded without hesitation. He read it and she said, then I'll hit the search as soon as I can. He said he had plans for tomorrow, so he couldn't finish in time, because she said. He smiled at the three of them, then watched them gear up for their next mission, and sent them off with a quick, heartfelt wish for luck. And just like that, they bid him farewell. He waved back, heart still buzzing, thinking the whole day felt scary nervy, but crazy fun. But the excitement for that upcoming meeting vanished completely. The next day, he was ice calm, like nothing had ever shaken him. He stormed up to the guild building, swapped into fresh clothes, and blurted in shock, you even prepared outfits for me. Renee grinned and said the suit fit him perfectly. Then he snapped his head toward the door like it was time to move. Nervous as hell, he realized his very first audience was about to walk in, and he knew he had to bring his absolute best. After what felt like forever, they finally tore into their destination. The carriage finally ground to a stop, and she blurted, we're here, we've arrived. This was the Parliament building where everything was about to go down. He leaned out of the carriage and said it was. Standing along the road, a swarm of servants bowed in sync and greeted the great apostle like he'd just descended from the heavens. It looked seriously impressive. One of them blurted out his name, Gallo, and they handed him the job of escorting them, so he turned on his heel and demanded they follow right behind him. The worried protagonist blurted, asking if they were greeting him with way too much pop, and Jamal slid up beside him like, nah, I'm a demi. God, yeah, that was the whole custom, and right after that they poured into the hall, and this time, something was different. The servant yanked a chair into place for him and urged him to sit down. In the hall, the man announced with a booming voice that they were truly thankful for the great apostle's presence, and then he made it clear. He wasn't just some noble. He was Marquis, right-hand man, the head of a soil house, and the official representative of the king himself. Another guy leaned in and claimed he was Duke Sanamaru, the head of the Sanson house. Jumal leaned in, gave his name, and claimed he ran the Thales City Adventures Guild branch. And this was Renee, the one tagging along with me. The fossil message hit, and the MC froze. Like, yep, it was totally his turn to step up and introduce himself. He blurted his name and swore he'd been blessed by the god Meshufim, and everyone instantly went wide-eyed at what they were hearing. Jafer pulled out a scroll and announced, the king has sent a message, now I'm the one delivering it to me. He snatched the message up and read this. Finland's ruler, Ruilo, had welcomed him himself. Bringing an apostle into his kingdom was the biggest honor he and his people could imagine, so he demands a grand welcome worthy of the moment. With a humble bow, he begs him to swing by his palace one day, clinging to a shy dream of forging a real friendship, and he's hoping, deep down, that he'll genuinely enjoy every moment of his stay. Sanamaru lugged in a bunch of stuff, dumped it on the table, and announced they were gifts from His Majesty, and the shock on his face was instant. He stared at it, then demanded, "Can I really take this?" They nodded, so he grabbed it right away. He pulled out his phone, thanked them, and told them straight up. Then he'd never stay in debt either. He yanked items from his inventory and declared they were herbs from Fairy Island, leaves torn from the world tree, and slender branches thin as whispers. Also grab a vial of healing potion. When they saw it, shock hit them all at once. Ryoma leaned in and asked, "Can I have a letter request?" While the Duke swore the king would be over the moon to get these priceless treasures. After getting the nod, he bowed and told King Ruillo he truly appreciated the invitation and the incredible gift. He swore he'd hit the capital soon, and he'd even fire off a return gift as a thank you for everything. Gaffer finally set his pen down and finished the letter. He swore, no matter what it cost, that he'd deliver this letter straight to His Majesty, bowed hard, thanked him, and said, "Looks like this is exactly where I'm meant to be." After that, they slipped into the reception room and he took a deep breath, confessing he'd been absolutely terrified. Jimmel grinned and said, "Good news. I'd still like to point out you handled yourself brilliantly." Reness suddenly asked if they could take a look at the papers tucked inside the king's gifts, and he nodded, agreeing without hesitation. And then he dove in, rifling through every one of them like he couldn't wait for the next clue. He said this paper gives the owner the power to buy a mansion right in the heart of the royal capital, and that this one does too. Then boom, the magical flying machine stole the show, and when the third document came into view, that agreement instantly grabbed his attention. And he claimed the power recognized him as a divine apostle and promised his safety across Philemon's territory. And if anyone showed hostility toward him, it would be treated like a full-blown insult to the entire ruling family. So His Majesty didn't just help him. He backed the protagonist fully, no strings, no limits, and the shock hit him like lightning. And he realized, from that moment on, the kingdom's destiny would rise or fall with him. But the weight of that responsibility scared him, because this kind of duty demanded a truly serious, rock-solid mindset. Mesufim slid him a message and basically said, "Relax, this is my blessing, go ahead and have fun to your heart's content." So he didn't need to stress over what was happening. Nothing terrible was going to happen. He'd already promised him, word for word. When the message hit, the tension eased. He decided it was better not to overthink it. He'd thank him later. Right now, he could finally keep the fun rolling. Then he blurted, "Can we head home now?" Renee nodded and promised she'd get a carriage sent over. When he gets back, is he going to do something, or just lay low? He said he's got one place he's dying to visit. After that, they tore into the hall of the Merchant Guild. He stepped inside, thinking the king was really going all out to help him. After all, that huge gift of money meant he'd finally be able to buy his own house. A man with a warm smile stepped up and introduced himself as Marunish, the Merchant Guild's boss, and then he called him an apostle by name, grinning like he'd been waiting for this meeting his whole life. Then MC stiffened up from that and asked, "Do you know him?" The guy replied, "Awareness is the most important thing for any merchant, so how are you going to serve?" He told her he wanted to buy some land, or even a house. He told them, "First we talk about what you want and what you can afford," then motioned them to follow him. He spread a bunch of drawings across the table and said that. He demanded a bunch of choices, scanned the list like it was a treasure map, and then landed on the one he swore was the three, dead serious. That mansion hit every box. A garden, a whopping 20 rooms, and a giant basement, exactly what he'd been hunting for. He thrust the document into the other guy's hands and said he'd probably stop right there. Then he froze, shocked at his own words, and blurted, "Did you decide that fast?" He grinned and said it was smarter not to delay buying something truly valuable, because this incredible mansion. It only cost 6 ingots. Maruni even offered to hire servants for him if he wanted, and each of them could be paid 600 binas, which was a seriously impressive wage. Ryoma said that, then demanded they track down 2 maids, a manager, and a butler. Each one paid 1,000 binas every month. He nodded in agreement, and just like that, they bolted out of the building. Then he flagged down the coachman, waved the carriage over, and told him he was ready to finally be allowed to show him the. They pulled up at the perfect spot, and he hopped out. Then thanked him with a grateful voice for sticking it out, because this was about to be his new estate. When he laid eyes on it, pure shock hit him, and then they started touring the area where he kept grinning and saying it was absolutely delightful. The decor was so breathtaking it felt impossible to fault. Marini laughed, saying those words totally flattered him. "All the houses we sell have to feel cozy, bright, and spotless. That's our main rule. A servant S showing up tomorrow." Then once he's gone, the protagonist flops onto the sofa and grins because it's finally his own home, and he received. Mesufim sent him a message. If you're into this mansion, why not drop a teleporter right here? With the Travelgate app, he could set a teleport spot wherever it's handy, but he had to stay sharp and not wander too far from it. He read it and froze, because he realized he'd totally forgotten about that awesome app in the first place, and now he couldn't stop kicking himself for not using it way more. If that didn't happen, he never would have helped ruin things, so yeah, everything's fine. The very next morning, Maruni came. Velnan wished him a bright good morning and then made good on his word, bringing the servants just like he promised. Janice, Mariana, and Rua Maria bowed to him, blurted out how thrilled they were to meet him, and begged him to take care of them. He shoved a contract into their hands and declared every employment term was written right here. Then he quickly added that every employee was locked into a non-disclosure agreement, too. MC tells everyone to stop and soak in the mansion layout first, then memorize the daily routine like it's mission briefing. At 6 a.m., he jolts awake, scrambles up, and starts cooking breakfast. By 7 a.m., he's eating, then hitting the store for groceries and packing lunch, and at noon, it's full-on chaos. Lunch, errands, cleaning, then back to cooking again for dinner at 6 p.m. after the dishes are done. The servants finally get their free time, and they eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner right after the master. And yep, 3 breaks are slammed into the day. 9 a.m. the afternoon, and 3 p.m. Janez is stunned and practically yells, 3 breaks. Then he agrees and fires back, but is it different? And the answer comes. That they worked from the crack of dawn till the dead of night, until the masters finally called it quits, leaving them with almost nothing to rest. He snapped that everything was awful and pointless. If they were wiped out and sick, then it was time to rest, no need to force themselves to work. Everyone dropped into a bow and shouted their thanks at him, like he'd just saved the world. After that, they started cranking through all kinds of chores, one task after another. We chased our way around the estate, and by evening we were so close to sitting on the soap. And he couldn't stop thinking how unbelievably incredible it felt. He had so many loyal, hardworking servants that he could hand off almost all the work and finally kick back. He needs to sprint over to the fairy garden and knock out his daily errands, no delays. Maybe he should finally finish that quest, and when he spotted one tied straight to the dungeon, surprise hit him like a punch. And in that moment I'm like, this is what Meshafim's really capable of, right? So if this is a challenge, he's already pumped and ready to take it head-on. The very next day he told everyone, I already warned the servants about my absence, so now you're free to go. He hooked up with the rest of the adventurers and hit the road with them. He clocks something weird and blurts out, what is that? It looked exactly like a temple column, so he figured this has to be the dungeon entrance, right? People just walk straight through it. He stepped right through the column. He suddenly found himself in a cave, then snapped his head around, scanning every inch. Right then, a message snapped onto his screen and hit him like a jolt. God carved one command on the door, welcome to my dungeon, and then he tweaked it just enough to make it worse. Now it sucks up the unstable energy from the collapsing world, then spits out new resources, items, and even monsters, plain and simple. He can have fun. Yeah, the protagonist thought that sounded wildly reckless, but he'll force himself not to overthink it. He strode into the dungeon, convinced a quick look around first couldn't possibly hurt. A colossal monster rocketed toward him, and he clocked it instantly, and then he let it go. A brutal gust of wind ripped through the air, hitting instantly. He instantly obliterated it. Then boom, the items started raining down, hovering over the slain monster's body. He couldn't believe it. He said he wouldn't even have to go get them himself. He'll grab the loot, then push forward like there's no time to waste after that. He pushed deeper, tore through the monsters, and snatched the treasure chest he'd been hunting. And he goes, I've already snagged a ton of stuff. What the hell is he talking about? Suddenly, an adventurer's corpse crashed down right beside him, and what he saw sent pure terror crashing through him. He bolted away at full speed, kept running until he finally stopped, right in front of her. He crawls into his safe place and breathes hard, trembling from pure stress and exhaustion. He stared with a sour, unimpressed face, like, is this really what I'm meant to enjoy? Maybe that's it for today. He was shaking with fear, so he ran full sprint without checking where he was going. And the second he did, blaring noises crashed into him, FFFFFF, like the world was screaming. He knew he had to break free from here fast. He lit up with pure joy the moment he spotted a group of. He pushed forward on his mission, then sprinted up to them and blurted out apologies, and demanded they show him the way out. One of them shot back with a sour look, and he strode into the dungeon like it was nothing. So why in the world did it feel like he was walking straight to his death? He swore he was only here for the very first time, and the moment I heard that, my anger cooled off just a bit. So they cornered him with questions. Does that make him a total newbie? Either way, everyone was already packing to leave, so they stepped in and helped him push through. Next time, he should have grabbed a map, because what he heard next completely stunned him. He just stared at it and thought, wait, he actually has a map, then realized he'd totally forgotten all about it. Another dude rolled up, shouted DC, and told him to quit grumbling. He swaggered up to the newbie and introduced Shin. This is Seldian, then pointed to Riord standing beside him and leaned in like, all right, what's your name? He blurted his name, told him it was great meeting him, and then his thoughts drifted back to wandering around. That dungeon was terrifying all on its own, so he begged him to come with him, later. He burst out of the dungeon and thanked them from the bottom of his heart for saving him. He pulled out a handful of gold coins and told them, take this as my gratitude. And when Desai saw it, her eyes went wide as she blurted, are you really sure about this? He nodded and said, if someone shows you kindness, you've got to pay it forward with kindness. With a grin on his face, he thanked him like he'd just won the world, and said he finally had enough to buy medicine for his sister. The MC blinked, totally caught off guard, and asked, wait, is she sick? He nodded, then warned that her eyes were already fading to black, and one day she'd go completely blind. The medicine might slow the disease, but it costs an insane fortune. He clapped a hand on his shoulder and told him, this guy's ready to face any danger just to save his sister. So they hauled him into their squad, because he's known him since they were kids, and he's not about to leave him hanging when trouble hits. He told us his parents died when he was still a kid, and it was his sister who stepped up and raised him. Now it was his time to step in and help her. Hearing that hit him like a flashback, dragging every piece of his past right back to the surface. Thinking he was an only child, until his best friend, Takafumi Azusa, stepped in like a real sister. To him, she always stuck close, played with him like a brother, and over time he just started seeing her as his older sister. Then out of nowhere, she died in a brutal accident. He doesn't care if they find out he's a demigod. He's determined to save this girl, so he said. So he told Dissy he could try to cure his sister, and Dissy demanded to know. If even the clerics couldn't save her, then he's basically betting everything, because he truly thinks he can do it. Shin demanded to know how he was gonna cure her, and he yanked out his card and he demanded they swear, right then and there, not a word to anyone about what they were about to witness. They stared in confusion like, wait, what? But so. Seldian instantly got the whole picture, and the shock hit him like a punch to the gut. He slammed the words out in front of him, shouting that they had to kneel at once before. Standing among them was a sacred being from the very pinnacle of creation, an enormous apostle of legend. Ryoma was blown away by what they just heard, so he yanked him aside and demanded he ride. Ryard stepped up and grilled him, asking if it was true apostles could mend any sickness. Like, could he really cure anything at all? He sparked bright energy in his hand, nodded, and then said, even though he'd never dared to try before, he was finally going to push through and say, He closed in, bowed hard, and blared that he was sorry for the rudeness he'd shown lately. He pleaded with him to help his friend's sister, and to save Mazari no matter what. He promised he'd do absolutely everything he could to make it happen. Later, they finally reached his place, and he blurted, He registered it and swore he'd come back with someone incredible, then walked in, saw her sprawled in bed, and she greeted him with a sharp, who are you talking about? With a bright grin on his face, he pointed and said he'd been talking about the one who would heal her. Then the protagonist stepped up, introduced himself, and said he was thrilled to finally meet her. Dark energy blanketed most of her eyes, and she snapped that there was no point feeding false hope. This illness wasn't something you could chase away. You could only buy time until the inevitable finally caught up, and she'd already accepted that truth. Desai walked up to her and told her straight. Her brother was fighting tooth and nail to help, so she just needed to trust him. He closed the distance and told her the gods. It handed him the power he'd used to save her from her illness. Trusted him, and then he leaned in, told her he was about to start, and poured all his focus into the energy gathering in his hand. Everyone else stared in shock, like they couldn't believe what they were seeing, and held his breath, waiting for the outcome. She snapped her eyes open and stared straight at her. Then his eyes snapped to her hands, and he couldn't believe what he saw. As her sight finally started to come back, she gasped and shouted. She rushed to her brother and blurted that she could finally see again, clear enough to make out his face. Joyfully, Reward burst into tears, tackled him into a hug, and she sobbed back that he'd grown huge and strong. Then she poured out her gratitude because he'd taken care of her all this time. Everyone else erupted with joy, shouting, "I can't believe it!" Like they'd just watched a miracle unfold right in front of them. From here on out, they'd live their days in pure peace, happy together and perfectly in tune. As before, the MC grinned at them, joy lighting up his face, and his mind immediately raced with thoughts of what he'd just. He never thought his help would earn him a reward, because he did it purely out of his own free will. He never expected he'd feel this kind of joy, just watching someone else's happiness ignite like that. Man, they turned to him and basically couldn't thank him enough. Then she blurted, "Let me repay you," and promised she'd do literally anything. Embarrassment hit him hard, so he blurted a loud refusal and snapped that he didn't need a thing. He just had to go. She told him she wasn't about to stay buried in debt. She'd figure something out, no matter what. Just 3 days after she tapped into divine magic, Misari was completely healed. Every last ache vanished, and nothing bothered her anymore. Still, he made sure by telling her to hit him up through the guild if anything went south. Then he stormed to Ren and spilled everything. She wanted to buy that house and hit the dungeon for the first time so he'd know what it was like, so she'd be ready to talk about it. But he chose to stay silent about how close he came to getting caught. Lately, more and more people are showing up, begging to meet the apostle, and it's starting to scare him for real. The guild is holding them back with everything they've got, and he's absolutely overflowing with gratitude for it. He'll have to bring the goods back, and that night he sat in his estate thinking like, all the daily quests are done. Fenon sat there grinning from ear to ear, soaking up all the good vibes, while the real question hit. What about the divine quests, and why did it feel like only the brutal, most impossible ones were left? Someday he'd deal with it. Then his phone blasted a deafening sound out of nowhere. He leaned in and barked, "What the hell is this?" Then he cracked open the notification, and his jaw dropped when he saw that he'd received. He got an urgent quest dropped in his lap, read the message and froze, then blurted, "No way, this can't be. A wyvern is out there. Watch that moving red dot because it's coming straight at us fast." So this counter literally tells you how long the monsters got before it crashes into the city. He realized this was a disaster, and he knew he had to warn Jamal right now, before he got slammed, so Jamal could call in reinforcements. He burst into the guild building, blared the guildmaster's name, and demanded immediate attention for an urgent matter. He spotted a dude already parked in his office and snapped that he was messing things up. Then he looked him in the eye and told him it was fine. He didn't bat an eye. Jumel flat out said that, looking at everything, this was the real deal, and it was urgent right now. Ryoma slammed out the truth at the top of his lungs. An approaching wyvern was closing in on the city, and everyone froze at what he'd just heard. The stranger threw in an apology, then blurted a question. How on earth did he know that, and who was he really? She snapped her attention to him, greeted him as Mr. Van Ann, and then introduced this apostle like it was a major reveal. He hauled himself off the couch, said it, and that was the whole reason. The demigod everyone's been whispering about. Now the hero is all in, ready to serve, and he can't wait to finally meet him. He nodded back with a totally baffled look and matched the gesture right away. He yanked out his phone, and Jamal shot back, asking if that device had finally helped him track the wyvern. He nodded and told him, "Based on my calculations, a small flock of dragons is already tearing in from the west. They show up in about 5 days. Meanwhile, they slapped the map down and Vannon leaned in, saying, 'This is the way it was,' so they were right around here now. And with nesting season creeping in, the wyverns were probably hunting for spots packed with food." The guild leader's face tightened with worry as he snapped, "This is bad. Fortun is almost in sight. If we don't stop right here, they'll attack for sure." He figured teleporting that far was a no-go, then asked, flat out, how long it would take to reach the city. He swore they'd need 2 days on the fastest mount, but with the wyvern's speed in the sky, there was no way they could outrun it. He shouted that they couldn't just sit back and munch. Something had to be done. So as they barreled toward the city van, they realized they'd have to slam back their attack before it reached them. He stepped in to help and told them it looked like the hero and the apostle would somehow pull through this brutal job. He thanked him anyway, but the other guy waved it off and said, "Don't thank me, I'm just doing my job." Right then, it was time to leave. Jamal needed to get the horses on his side. So he nodded, agreed, and swore he'd shoot a message to the neighboring brand right away. Then they begged everyone for help, and right after that, the two of them burst into a gallop on horseback. And then he blurted, "Wait, was that black rectangle some kind of magical artifact?" The MC spun around and shot back like, "Yeah, something like that." He blurted out, stunned, "Wait, apostles really have special abilities and crazy secrets like that?" "So it's true," he said his name to his face, told him he was a hero, right? But what in the world does that even mean? He said heroes don't show up for the easy wins. People become heroes the moment they crush the 100th level and stride into the next stage of evolution. Van pulled off something totally incredible, and then I had to ask, okay, what's his level? Van answered fast, he's at level 381 right now. He spun around completely stunned, blurted out that he was still pretty young, and honestly, it was mind-blowing. With a smile that fooled everyone, he looked younger than he was, because the truth hit hard. He was already 84. The moment he became superhuman, time stopped hitting him the same. His aging slowed to a crawl, and somehow he barely changed since he was 24. With superhumans living for centuries, that made him feel like a kid. Ryoma stared at him and figured he'd turned into a demigod by pure luck. And heroes like him poured every ounce of their lives into shattering what humans thought was impossible. Pure perseverance that demands your real respect. Venom admitted he could never even measure up to the great apostle. And right now he's just learning the ropes, chasing his example, and trying to become the kind of good person he's holding up. After a while, they kept riding hard on horseback, and he leaned in like it was big news. Just so you know, we're almost there. The townspeople came sprinting up to them and shouted full volume that their town was in big trouble. They had to turn back, because a colossal wyvern was looming there, and once the message hit, they were already fully geared up. But they couldn't strike back. They were shoved into a retreat for cover, and that cover got ripped apart almost instantly. The protagonist blurted that they'd come to take down the wyvern, then told everyone to scramble into the safest spot they could find. The whole town nodded in sync. Then they charged forward on horseback, galloping hard, and Vannon shot a worried look and blurted that it seemed we'd missed our chance, and we had to. They finally stumbled into town, and right away they spotted several. Giant monsters tore through the town, turning everything into rubble. And the monsters went straight for the townspeople, sending them screaming in every direction while the whole place erupted with loud fear. He shouted for help, and then the hero yanked a spear out of a tiny bag. I called him and told him we can't let any more civilians pay the price. He nodded along, yanked out his phone. He figured he'd dump every last divine point straight into magic power. After that, he poured all his focus into a crushing burst of power, and a surge of energy sparked in his hands, and he shouted it at the top of his lungs. They've got to slam the brakes right here. No more delays, no more chances. They sprinted toward the city street like their lives depended on it. And then he blared it loud, disperse now, we're not going to hold back. He sprinted straight up to the first wyvern. Then he drove his spear in and landed a brutal, bone-jarring blow. Snapped the rest of the monsters, attention to him like a flare in the dark. And they shot straight at them without wasting a second. The MC unleashed fire magic, and the flames came roaring to life. And then he lunged at a nearby monster, slamming the attack before it could even react. He managed to slay the wyvern, then Vane just stared. Bursting in surprise, he laughed and said that right up until this moment, he'd never been able to admit that he'd always been. He still had doubts for a second, but now, he's 100% sure that he's truly an apostle. Then the monster lets out a bone-chilling roar that hits like a punch. A piercing scream ripped through the air, and it absolutely stunned him. He kept his eyes on it, then immediately burned through his power to heal himself. He stared up as the wyvern tore through the sky toward him, and the thought hit him like, great. They finally baited the monsters out of the city, and now they're ready to hit back with everything they've got. He slammed spikes up from the ground like the earth had turned into a weapon. But some of the monsters shot into the air, twisting out of the attack at the last second. He saw it, and like that, he slammed a dome of. He rerouted the wind to trap the monsters before they could break free. Vannon's eyes widened, and he blurted out, what? Said that this barrier would hold the ramp in place, keeping it sealed tight. Rampaging wyverns just wouldn't let up. He vowed to tear the city apart. Then he sprang up and dashed straight into the chaos, cutting off the words mid-dive. He hurled a vicious strike with his spear, clobbering 2 targets at once. Monsters surged in all at once, and it completely blindsided him. And he said, if you don't act, we'll have to deal with 2 fewer monsters. Keep it rolling, hunt them down, and wipe every last one out. The monsters shot up into the sky so high, and they, with a deep, thoughtful stare, Yama muttered that they could feel it somehow. Threats were flying, and they were too terrified to drop down, Half the day was already gone when he snapped into action, blasting out water magic, only to have it fail on him. He warned them that trapped under the dome, they'd struggle to fight at full power. But if it came down, the wyverns would take a hit like they'd never seen before. He shot off like a streak of light, and then he noticed those monsters weren't just staring at him. They were peering past the barrier like it had them distracted. Something was out there, What was it? Vannon snapped his head toward him and demanded to know if Gimel Spakov's reinforcements had finally arrived. He pulled up the map on his phone, got the green light, and warned them that something had been spotted moving outside the barrier. His own power wouldn't last. No way. The moment it started to fade, he'd rip through the barrier so the warriors could surge into the fight. It was a death trap, but he had no choice. He shouted his name, swore he'd break the barrier right now, and told him to stay alert, and the moment he said it. He tore the barrier down, and suddenly countless adventurers poured through. He burst straight into the fight against those monsters. Their attacks hit but nothing cracked, no damage at all, so they finally noticed the problem. The protagonist started channeling raw energy into his fist, and said that even a wyvern couldn't hold out. Boom, he unleashed a surge of brutal, overwhelming power. Then he swung down and cut one of the wyverns soaring overhead. Relief hit him hard. He'd succeeded, and he figured that one wyvern was finally dead. The others couldn't lift into the sky anymore. Now their defeat was just a ticking clock. The final monster was still standing, so he spun around, eyes burning. He spotted the wyvern rocketing straight at him, and his gut dropped. Then he realized his guard was slipping. Guard down, Vannon caught it instantly, watching through his spear, sensing every opening like it was about to break. Took control, crushed the monster, and saved him with one last strike. Then he stared down at the monster corpses. His face lit up with pure shock, and declared they pulled it off, every single person who. He was absolutely thrilled to finally fight those monsters. He snatched the win, turned to face him, and they stumbled into the ruined city, where everyone was throwing themselves into the chaos, dragging the wounded to safety and grieving over the dead. MC stared around, face heavy with sorrow, and muttered that this was a heartbreaking sight. He thought the monsters were gone for good, but then the truth hit hard. Those dead people couldn't be brought back. All that was left was to throw prayers skyward for the dead. He prayed their relatives would somehow find the strength to keep living. They can finally rest easy. His prayers made it happen. A blazing burst of energy exploded around him and instantly grabbed all their attention. And they stared, asking what it even was. Could this really be divine light burning in front of them? A blinding beam suddenly cut through the darkness, flooding every person and the soul they carried made their way to heaven. The surviving people finally managed to send them off there. The ghosts of dead relatives and friends with. Vannon flashed a grin, then stared straight at it. He rang him and warned that the spirits of the dead townsfolk were about to rise. Heaven Ryoma's strength started to slip, and his consciousness began to fade right as the reason hit him. He overdid it with raw strength, and then he noticed. He slipped in just in time and caught him, right as people started gathering around, gawking at him with shocked faces. Then just a little later, this crazy incident would be etched into history as the unforgettable miracle of Fortu. And on that fateful day, the identity of the apostle's name spread like wildfire through the whole city, until after a while he finally showed up too. His senses groaned awake in bed, and he demanded, "Where am I?" As he fought to remember, and then he finally managed, they killed all the wyverns, but before he could even finish, the adult M grabbed his time and stole the rest. The man burst into the room and shouted that he was awake already. Conan slipped into the room with him and immediately asked, "So, how are you feeling?" He swore he was fine, then the man dropped to one knee. It turned out this was Laudon, the local burgomaster, and he practically exploded with gratitude, thanking him for saving their city. Then Loudon's confusion hit hard as he told him to stand up and asked, "Can you tell me what's really going on after all that disaster?" What? Rage churned in him when the burgomaster revealed that about half the city's people had already been wiped out, and the city itself had been nearly wiped off the map. Because of the miracle he'd pulled off, they at least got to say goodbye to the fallen. And through it all, his power still came roaring through, mending the wounded when it mattered most. The people didn't get shattered by the sting of losing that came down on the coast. Their will to live burned brighter than ever, and hearing that made him feel truly relieved. He asked if he could step outside, and Vinnan, looking dead worried. After he proved his power, he told them to shove that idea aside for now and get some rest today. Because the second the townspeople understood he was an apostle, they'd swarm him and never let him breathe. The protagonist couldn't stop spiraling over what he'd heard, and all he could do was wonder what it meant. Now they finally know the truth about who he really is, and he admits that maybe it's smarter for him to lay low for now. With a little smirk, he said, "I won't be gone for long. I'll have to head back to the capital soon." Shoulder to shoulder with them felt like a prize beyond compare, and he knew he could always lean on him if trouble hit. So he held that trust, returned it, and kept going. He fought 1,000 battles, stood by his comrades every time, and carried strength so wild it felt unreal. But he didn't brag a single word, and that silence lit a fire of respect, pushing him to hope that their journey. He swore he'd do it again someday, and then he yanked out his phone, bragging that this was an urgent quest with a reward attached. 150,000 divine points. That's absurd. Maybe he should rush to install a brand new app or something. A library app popped up on his screen, and it grabbed his attention so hard he said, "It'd be amazing if he could use that power to read novels with it." He opened the app and told me, straight up, there were textbooks on magic waiting inside. Crumbling historical treatises, and forbidden alchemical manuscripts brimming with secrets no one dared to touch. Not one single book from his world showed up, and that loss hit him hard, pure frustration boiling over. But Mesufim messaged him, "If you really want manga or novels, just download the app, come join your cozy little world." He stared at the page, stunned. Could something like that possibly be real? He stumbled onto the app and blurted at the top of his lungs, "Does it really cost 50,000 points?" He tapped the screen and claimed, bold as brass, that God himself had recommended it. He tapped the app, and right on the screen it demanded 10,000 divine points just to launch it. So, did he really have the nerve to keep going? Rage sparked in his chest, but he still coughed up the money, and deep down he knew he'd been played. Out of nowhere, a door materialized right in front of him, and it felt way too familiar. He pushed through that door, and with a subpoena in hand, everything changed. Shock hit his face plain as day. Claimed this was his hallway, then bolted like the lights were about to burn out. He bolted to his room and burst out laughing with pure. These were the shelves packed with his all-time favorite books and anime series DVDs lined up and ready to binge. This was his room, no question about it. Mesufim agreed and went along with it. He told me he scanned his house into a digital copy, then built a whole pocket dimension from it. He busted his tail for this moment, and he's calling it his reward. But he has to remember he can't go over his spending limit. Mer's been here for 7 days straight. No big deal. A week in this place is basically a blink, so he can finally go all in on his favorite. MC dropped into the chair, flashed him a bright, happy grin, and told him it was absolutely perfect. He finally started having fun, and he couldn't even wrap his head around it. Like, maybe he wouldn't have to give up his hobbies forever after all. How did he miss this? A week later, he finally got up for. He slid into the chair and grinned, like he'd just hit the jackpot. He had a blast, and now he's ready to jump in and help people. He slipped into the shattered city and closed in on a whore. A woman with a whole brood of kids looked him in the eye and said she'd seen her share of pain. Then he swore he was going to build an orphanage. Of course, he'd cover every cost and crush every hassle for them, no stress at all. The woman lit up and thanked him with pure joy. He watched everyone busting their backs and realized these folks from the nearby settlements were showing up every single day, so they always had the manpower to get the job done. If this kept going, the city wouldn't just recover, it would be rebuilt in no time. Ludun barreled up to him, shouted, "Come here," and everything changed in that split second. "Could I steal a minute and talk to you?" He nodded, and right then they slipped into a tiny room together. The guys escorting them swore they'd come straight from a church that worshipped every god. And then, Lowell and Azan. Both showed up, grateful beyond words that he'd agreed to lower himself and go along with them. They were still grieving the victims of the latest tragedy, hands clasped in prayer, pleading for their souls to find peace. They stepped forward and pledged their support to the city, speaking on behalf of their church. Ryoma smiled and said this would be a lifesaver, so the townspeople could get their lives back to normal faster. He told them they'd also build a temple in the city, right on the exact spot where he'd performed that miracle. He asked if he was really okay with it, but what was he supposed to say? Ludun grinned and said, "Go for it, I don't mind." If there was a shrine to the apostle in the fort, people would get fired up fast, parishioners would pour in, and the believers' donations would turbocharge the city's restoration. He gave the go-ahead, and the three of them erupted in gratitude right away. A month later, he finally thought. The temple's construction was finished in record time. The moment the news hit the public, pilgrims from every town and village stormed in, all rushing toward it. A little later, the city started breathing again, brighter than before. So he strode down the streets, convinced there was nothing left to fear, and headed straight back to Thela. Somehow he totally lost his way back home, and right then the townspeople closed in on him. She stepped up, spoke sweet and polite, and asked him to touch her child. He tossed him a bundle of veggies for the journey, then pushed the parcel into his hands and demanded, "Take this." She stared in total confusion at the swarm of people pressing in on her. then bolted off, shouting at the top of her lungs as she ran. And he begged for forgiveness, then stopped like he'd said everything he could for today. After a while, he stormed back to his mansion like nothing could stop him. Mariana called him up and told him that a crowd had already started. They all piled back at the mansion gates again, slumped at the table with a bitter scowl, snapping that now there was a whole crowd of admirers. Was tailing him, and life suddenly felt completely unbearable, like he'd have to lie. He shoved back from the table, leaned in, and said, "So be it, maybe you." He'd head for the royal capital, San Angels, and he couldn't stop thinking about what the king was really planning. King had been waiting there for ages, and now Vannon was finally here too. King couldn't wait to lay eyes on them. Then he swapped into fresh clothes, marched up to his servants, and declared he'd be staying in the capital for a while. No worries. He handed over money for food and household needs, and ordered them to guard the house while he was away. Everyone dropped into a bow, praying he'd make it through the journey safely. When night swallowed the sky, he slipped out of the mansion, certain he'd vanish before sunrise, because he refused to draw any unwanted attention. On his way, he bolted to the guild, spilled every detail to Jamal, and demanded he deal with the fallout. But he didn't say goodbye to his friends. He just shot them one last look like he'd be back. All right, enough talking. Time to hit the road and roll. The next morning, people in town were already whispering that I just heard the new apostle has come roaring back to Thales. I can't stop thinking, where's he going to pull his next miracle next, and what if it lands right in our town? That overheard conversation caught the eye of a nearby adventurer like a spark hitting dry tinder. While MC glanced at his phone, he blurts out that San Angels, capital, is way too far for comfort. So he'd roll into town for a breather on the way. Then he'd blast off again, riding pure adrenaline and the heat of the moment. Maybe he should have rented a horse, because right when he noticed he'd earned the Flying Skill Award, the whole situation started to feel way more real. And asked if he should go for it. Just imagining himself flying was all it took. Somehow he managed it. To launch into the sky, and it felt ridiculously. Completely blindsided by it. And then he shot off fast, locking onto the perfect direction, and said he could reach the city that way. He spotted a town named Algar up ahead, and promised through clenched teeth that he'd shut it all down. So he tried every corner of the place, one dead end after another, and every single one shut him down. Then he dropped onto the roadside and stared, realizing every place was already taken. So why was it like this if this wasn't even a resort town? A boy came up to him, wagging his dog's tail like he owned the world. Called him over and demanded, "You looking for a place to crash tonight or what?" "Right." Yoma's jaw dropped when he found out beastmen actually lived here, and he quickly nodded along. And he snapped that everything was already taken, and then he leaned in, saying more travelers had been showing up lately. They sounded like they were talking about a sanctuary and an apostle, and he couldn't shake the fear that everything he heard was all his fault. He said it wasn't just luck that he had a place he could crash for the night. Then he grinned when he heard that. He nodded along, figuring there was no point to spill his name. Then he blurted, "I'm Taro," and said that. That name sounded way too weird, Nog. Yep, that had to be him, so he had to follow. They dragged him to the inn and shoved him toward the reception desk, while the folks already sitting inside watched like something was about to go down. I asked, "So who is this guy, Mr. Apostle?" And they swore he can heal any sickness and patch up every wound. He guided the Wyverns away from the city, planted a shrine there, and stared at it like, "I've got to touch this miracle." Ryoma yanked his hood down even harder, hiding his face as he thought, "They're talking about me." After that, Nag shoved him into a spare room and told him to holler anytime he needed something. So he nodded, then covered his nose with his sleeve, like the stench was already killing him. He held the door and snapped that it reeked of sweat in there, though one. Don't expect miracles from a bargain dump. He'll scrub the place clean with magic, then crash out the second he's done. He shot up in bed, yanked his phone out, scanned the quests, and muttered that today's daily quests. Every detour to the capital was packed with quests he could smash through, and one mission immediately snagged his attention. But the real mission was ruthless. Smash the lair of those abnormally multiplying orcs, because the reward was waiting. It was 30,000 divine points and enough premium ogre meat to make you drool. Then he skimmed it and said it sounded insanely good. Dangerous, and still he couldn't resist. Curiosity burned in his chest as he stared at the meat, thinking, "If I nail this in one go, I'm leveling up." Snatched the meat. Then the very next day, he launched himself straight to the right place. He pored over the map and declared, based on what it showed. Right around here, he finally reached He stumbled into a work settlement, and the second he did, pure shock hit him like a wave because he couldn't believe what happened next. He took in the sheer number of them and couldn't even blink. Then he stared straight at it. He took off and shouted that this wasn't a lair anymore. But if you leave an entire village like that, it'll stay trapped in that fate. Those monsters won't stay hidden. They'll keep growing in the dark and then burst out of the forest. He jabbed the monitor screen and figured this would boost his magic. He used divine points, and then with that power in hand, he created. He conjured a flood of water and carved it into razor-sharp swords. He unleashed this magic on the monsters, then braced for whatever came next and thought. But here's the thing, side by side, they still don't pack a real punch. Now he unleashed that brutal magic and decided it was finally time to end them for good. He spotted a bunch of monsters still crawling on, and he thought, it can't end like this. Those attacks from up above barely even landed. They were shockingly weak. He dropped to the ground and figured he could. Take out those huge orcs on the ground, bury them alive with earthmines. Magic, one of the monsters let out a deafening roar, loud enough to shake the whole place. A thunderous roar burst out, and then, out of nowhere, everything caught him off guard. He sprinted toward him in a flash. Magnus's eyes widened as it tore forward at impossible speed. Then he spun up wind magic and blasted the attack right back. This monster tore through the chaos, and the other orcs rushed in too, throwing themselves at it with everything they had. He slammed the attack back, then launched himself into the air and took off. And he figured dropping to the ground was way too risky. He focused his fire magic, sharpening his thoughts as he started to think. There was a forest all around us, so thinking about firefighters was pointless. He'd love to believe that, but not right now, not with everything going on. He started blasting out brutal fire magic, and in his mind he couldn't shake what this. Once it worked, he couldn't hesitate. He had to hit the attack again. But one of these monsters still got caught in the act. Survived the attack, and then he let out a loud roar. He swore he'd torch them all to ash. After a blur of motion, he slammed onto the ground and he stared in shock because the biggest orc was dead, but somehow he was still standing. He spun around like he'd made up his mind, started to walk off and thought, maybe if I'm standing like this, everything will. All right, then he'd turn this place into a sanctuary and make it feel like home. And just like he knew it would, this monster, with its final breath, shut him down and cut him off. A sword slammed into his arm, and he erupted into a brutal scream. Pain ripped through him. Then he spotted a massive orc sword coming into view, and kept wondering whether, in one last desperate push, he'd actually lifted his hand to strike. Not now. He crumpled to the ground and started. And in the blink of an eye, he was slipping toward unconsciousness, and before it even happened, he unleashed sacred magic. Then, after a while, the world shifted. He snapped back into his senses, and just like that, everything from earlier crashed into his memory. He finally looked closer and saw his arm had been fully restored. So he forced himself to breathe, calmed down for a second, and his mind instantly latched onto that terrifying orc. He was insanely strong. Then he let his guard down after beating the wyverns, and that was the warning bell he needed to listen to. Then he shot to his feet and declared that this place had become a true sanctuary, right down to the last detail of what he was trying to finish saying. Right, next time he'd handle that orc meat, no question. Then he glanced at his phone and blurted, "My level just hit 12. And just like that, his stats surged too. Everything jumped except magic, while his body felt lighter with every breath. The MC told himself, I've got to stay positive, because he refused to let his mind spiral. Even after he finally got his comeuppance, that whole mess still ended up being a wild, unforgettable experience. Now it was time for him to make his way back to Alga. He had to ditch his old clothes, and if he didn't, if he could, he'd take a bath. Magic could fix everything, sure, but he still craved that clean, fresh feeling in his own bones. The guy beside him clocked him instantly and yelled his name, and in a split second, he knew it was him. He clocked the voice instantly, spun around, and there was Rom, plus the whole crew right behind him. They came up to him and demanded to know what he was doing here, and he answered, straight-faced, that they'd just landed a security contract. Ruin snapped out a memory, called him up, and told him they'd put the word out in flyers that he'd vanished out of nowhere, then watched the whole place erupt in chaos. He looked freaked out, shushed everyone with a sharp gesture, and told them, straight up, not to call him by name. He stepped in and said his name was Taro, and it felt like he was already planning to disappear for a while. Once the chaos finally died down, he'd come back, because too many people had jammed into those valleys, and Jamal was stuck in a brutal spot. So he demanded that the guy announce his departure for a journey, and somehow he got him to understand. And Permy spotted his ripped sleeve and shot him a question, Did someone attack you? Ryoma stared at it and snapped. Something gone down in the orc lair. He stared like something was seriously wrong, then muttered that it looked like he'd taken a brutal hit, and then he leaned in and asked, "So what's he gonna do next?" He told us he'd stay the night right here, then hit the road for the next city, because he's marching straight to the capital, San Angels. Roma beamed and asked, "So, we're going together, right?" Since they'd already finished the job, it felt like the only thing left was where they'd head next together. Left was to get back to the city. Ruin looked totally thrown off, like, "Wait, what?" And he was making those wild, sudden choices again. Yet he still wanted to hit the capital, and she said it sounded amazing. The real question was how he'd spend the money for the trip. He grinned and told him it wouldn't feel boring with company around. He'd cover the costs so they wouldn't have to worry about money. Worry gnawed at them. If they were going together, they were determined to make the trip way more fun than scary. He'd totally be down to cooperate. They grinned and agreed, and the moment he got the go-ahead, his mind started racing. They figured all they had to do was grab fresh gear and hunt down new clothes. After what felt like forever, they finally flopped onto their beds and crashed hard. He stared at his phone, lost in whatever he was reading, and figured that proved it. He loaded up apps that actually help him on the road. Then the recreation room app popped up, bam, and a door materialized, opening into a room that had been created just for him. You couldn't see it, not humans, not monsters, but you could still summon your companions to join you, the camping app adds. Inside the campsite, there's a table, some chairs, a whole barbecue setup, and even a tent. And then right when they're camping, a barrier suddenly kicks in. You can expand the tent space by spending points, and he finally finished buying the app. Apson figured it was time to level up his magical arsenal. Ice and snow magic to freeze anything, and lightning magic to rip control of thunderstorms right out of the sky. It's the magic of the highest stat. Dump a massive amount of mana into it, and you can yank control of the weather at will, and yeah, that's as terrifyingly powerful as it sounds. Once the preparations are done, he'll likely stop right here. Then he can finally kick back and enjoy the ride with his friends the next. In the morning, they tore out of the city, and the protagonists declared they had to make a run for Muirego. Heading straight toward San Angels. They nodded in agreement, then sprinted straight into the forest. Right on his way, Roma ran into a pack of monsters, and he instantly ripped his sword out, blasting, "These are goblins and a giant praying mantis." Then he warned them to be on guard. He stepped up and demanded, "Let me handle this." That he couldn't wait to unleash his brand new magic. He sprinted straight at the goblins and blasted them with ice magic. And froze those monsters, right away Then he bolted toward the praying mantis and unleashed his light attack. Magic erupted on the battlefield, and it absolutely blew his allies away. He tore through those monsters and wiped them all out. With his eyes wide and shock painted across his face. Swore it was insanely powerful. She rushed up to him, eyes wide, and blurted, "Wait, this is ice magic, and it really looks like lightning." He leaned in and told her, "First is ice and snow magic, second is lightning magic." She blurted, stunned, that she'd never even heard of magic like that before. He snapped that it was painfully obvious. Then MC shot back that he had to learn how to control it. "Maybe they can call it for today. After that, we'll see." Ruin reached into the bag, grabbed what he came for, then snapped that they'd be sleeping out in the open, so they'd better get a fire going. He yanked out his phone and told them, "Don't, there's no need for that," because he had a safer way already lined up. He carved out a room in the space, then they stormed inside and demanded answers. Loudly wait was that his power too. They even set up a whole bath and a toilet too. He swore that both people and monsters would. So they can slip in here and finally drop their shoulders to relax. Honestly, it's way better to set up her own room. So he moved everything, handed it over to her, and she thanked him. Then they all sat at the table, grabbed their drinks, and he went, "All right, now we celebrate." So now they can finally travel together. Roma was absolutely. He took a sip, and the second he did, his eyes went wide. He couldn't stop praising how insanely tasty it was, and the rest of the crew were just as blown away. And Ryoma goes, "It's called orange juice, just a fruit drink." With a smug grin, he scooped the loot out of his own space and stashed it in his inventory. And didn't stop there, grabbing ramen and a stack of manga on the way out. After they gulped it down, he leaned in and asked if he could pour more, because she definitely wanted more too. He grinned and said he still had a bunch left, like coffee and soda. Then, Permy bolted to the bathroom, and just as the door swung, with a smug, satisfied grin, he said that bath feels like pure luxury, like I just unlocked a whole new level of comfort. She couldn't thank him enough for that, because it meant everything to her. She usually only drags a wet towel across her body, so this is a total change of pace. Then she slipped into her nightwear, stepped out of the bathroom, and when she caught Roma and Ruin staring, faces flushed, she froze like the whole moment was about to snap. To dodge the embarrassment, she slipped into a separate room and told her that she'd hit the bed first. He leaned in, called his name, and asked if he'd go next, and everyone was stunned because he didn't look worried one bit. And then they started going off on it, until they finally took it from there. They spun right toward the bath and headed out at once. They'd only been on the road for a week when they finally reached a bed. One of them snapped Taro and En. He asked if they should take a breather right here, then snapped his head around and told them, "We've only got a little while left, keep moving." They'd sprint straight to the city, and he couldn't miss it. Everyone was smiling and waiting on his word. Agreed to rest, and somehow it felt like they genuinely loved every drop of that juice. He slumped on the roadside, cracked open his drinks, and started talking like something big was brewing. A carriage rumbled past, right in front of them. A man skidded to a stop and stared them down, like something about them had just clicked. He stared at them and demanded, "What are you doing here?" Then he warned them this place was a death trap with monsters roaming everywhere. The man slumped in the carriage leaned forward and demanded, "Tell me, are we already in the city?" He bolted outside, scanned everything around him, and then just froze because he was. He froze in shock when he spotted their group, then strode right up and snatched a glass from Ruin. He cracked open the soda, stared at it like it didn't belong, and demanded to know why something like that was even here. Then he closed the distance and marched right up to the protagonist. And he asked, eyes locked on them, face dead serious, "He's Japanese, right?" I couldn't believe my ears when I heard it. Then he grinned and told her she didn't have to be so on guard. He's a reincarnator, and back in his past life he was Japanese. His name is Miyama Ryasuke, and out here in this wild world, everybody calls him Toroku. With a sharp, distrustful stare, he introduced himself, Senator Taro. And he grinned like, "Now it's not a big deal," then asked if he could give him a. Yoda nodded, then dug straight into his bag, hunting for it with total focus. He leaned in close and told him to take his time, then swore he'd keep the whole world from finding out he was the apostle, no matter what the sea rumors said. He snatched the drink, spun on his heel, and demanded the owner of Targ whether these people were welcome as guests. What did he even think? He looked genuinely stunned, then broke into a small smile because he almost never heard himself talk like that. He jumped off the carriage, introduced himself, and declared loud and clear that he was the one in charge of buying the velvet. "Hey, guild guy, if you don't mind, can I grab a sip of that drink too?" He nodded his agreement, handed him some soda, and Ryasuke told him to chug it straight. Full strength, no messing around. He started gulping deep sips that left him choking, and he was absolutely stunned by it, then blurted the question out loud. He burst out laughing and said, "All right, now you've got to sip it slow, feel the flavor as it hits." Then he did. He took it in, then froze, caught off guard by how sweet it felt. She took a sip and said, "This fizz hits a bit harsh, but it's crazy sweet. This drink's probably loaded with sweet, expensive sugar, right? Wait, is he not some aristocrat?" MC looked totally baffled and said, "Nope, my family's filthy rich." 1 second he got kicked out, and the next he's thrown into a brand new journey. Targ was reaching to offer him something, but right then, a monster burst into a sprint straight toward them. And then he blasted a thunderous roar into the night, snapped his sword out in a blink, and then he sliced through the monster in a single, brutal strike. Yeah, one hit and it was over. An insanely fast strike that hit like lightning. Shocked out of his mind by what just went down in that fight, he didn't even manage a single sound. Karg let out a shaky sigh of relief and blurted out that as Befitsterok, the calm one, slid his sword back in its sheath and muttered, "That's why. Enough is enough. He better apologize for the soda, because he's caught off guard and about to fire off a response." After a while, everyone finally rolled into the city of Morag, together. All 4 of them marched into this ultra-luxurious inn, and the second they laid eyes on everything inside, their jaws hit the floor in pure shock. Rome said they'd gotten a lift, and now they'd stumbled into this inn. Ruin immediately snapped. "So you just got dragged here, right?" But was any of this normal? Rehoma perched on the edge of the bed, then swore. This time, he'd swallow the fear and accept it with gratitude. Next time they'd have tea, they'd head for the lounge, or slip off to a quiet, secluded spot. You never know when trouble's gonna explode. Then, the very next day, a maid showed up. He burst in, wished them a loud good morning, and said Taro had a guest. Then he finally stepped out of his room and spotted Targ right as, until. Still, his guest wasn't alone. Another man had shown up. The guy beamed at him and introduced himself. Oygiz, the boss of the Velvet Guild. He heard he'd hauled an unusual drink along, so would he strike a deal with his trading guild? He stared, baffled, thinking, after all the effort they poured in. He couldn't say no, so he still showed up. But the second he did, you could feel the anger simmer because he absolutely hates being dragged into stuff like that. At this point, the only thing left is to break free and get out of this mess. No hesitation. He told him they say this drink tastes sweet, then bam, it hits you with explosive, sparkling spiciness. So, would he really pour him a cup? He thrust a glass of his drink into his hands. He blurted out, stunned, "Wait, is this?" Then he spotted this thing called soda, and went for it right there, like it was the coolest idea he'd ever had. Was completely stunned by it. He jerked forward and blurted out, "What is this?" Because it felt like something was exploding in his mouth all at once. That drink is pure sweetness, straight up delicious. Can you believe something like this even exists? Now tell me, will he be kind enough to bring it to his guild? They're already lining up to buy it, 10,000 Venus each. The protagonist swallowed his pride and apologized, admitting he only had a little left. Then he grinned, planning to sip it slowly with his friends to stretch the fun as long as possible. He's convinced he could pull it out of his personal space again and again, but he refuses to let anyone turn it into a business. Orgis said, "I get you," and the words landed like a promise. Maybe he'll only hand over a few bottles for his own personal stash. He's throwing out a deal for 20,000 Venus per head, so what's he really hoping you'll think? He apologized again and admitted he still couldn't sell it, rage tightening his fist. Then he swallowed his pride and said sorry. Maybe he'd finally have to let this idea go. And that's what let him finally forge a bond with the Lord Apostle. Something huge that was already setting the stage for everything to come. A legendary win. Then he turned around and sprinted straight back to the hotel. He stared at it with pure disgust, like it had personally offended him. Just look, later on he and his whole team was sprawled out in the hotel room, catching their breath. Suddenly, Ryasuk slipped up to him like a shadow. He snapped his hand over his mouth and whispered, and that he needed to calm down, so he spun around and stared him right in the face. He snapped, demanding what the guy wanted, showing up at this hour. Then he finally admitted his own guilt and insisted the whole thing was urgent. So he told him to calm down, shut up, and actually listen, because Master Oigiz was busy rounding up mercenaries to get his soda. He was about to pounce on him and rip it away. Wait, that's the apostle, right? He owes the master a debt, but even so, he refuses to come at the messenger with hostility. So he ditched that greedy jerk and stormed back to him like, "Here we go." He trusted him, then flipped open his phone and turned it on, and spotted a map packed with those ominous markers screaming danger. Then he jabbed his finger at it and shouted. He leaned in and demanded, "You've got that thing right? The smartphone." He yanked himself out of bed and blared that he'd explain everything later. He shouted, "Ruin," started jabbing at him to wake him up and told him wake up fast and wake the others too. He jerked awake when someone called his name, gasping, "What happened?" Panic hit him hard, so he snapped loud and urgent that we had to move right now because we needed to get out of here immediately. He slid his cloak on, spun around, and demanded, "What about me?" Ryasuk snapped back, "That's exactly what I came to talk about. So you're telling me he sticks with him for a bit, like what's the deal? It's not only that juice, he's got other stuff from Japan too. Right, so he wants to grill him about that smartphone too." He drops to one knee and shouts, loud and clear, that he'd do anything in his power for this. Roma burst out of the room and blurted, loud and fast, "Are you okay?" Ryoma whipped around and told him, "I'm fine." But the Oigiz mercenaries were already closing in, so they had to bolt out of here right now. They bolted out of the hotel, no time to breathe. But mercenaries swarmed them instantly, closing in from every side. Ryasuk shot them a worried glance and asked, "So you're telling me you didn't make it?" Then the mercenary grinned and asked what the hell happened to them out in the middle of the night. Why were they freaking out so bad? He called Taruka, and then everything went sideways. He stared at him with a surprised look and blurted, "So, what are you doing here?" He must not mess with their mission. The masters will not forgive it. Orders are the law now. So is he really going to repay that shelter with pure evil? He snatched his sword and snapped that this time their enemy was too damn strong. If he didn't back off, he'd live with regret. So he pleaded with him like a friend, begging him to retreat. He ignored him completely and blared that they had to obey the master's command and take care of them. They fought tooth and nail to shove the mercenaries back, trying. So he didn't kill them. He shoved the attacks back and let his thoughts race. That kind of power couldn't be unleashed inside a city. He snapped his gaze sideways and realized his allies weren't even close. He kept his hopes up, convinced he didn't want to stir up any chaos. Now it was time to end this for real. He unleashed a surge of raw, earth-shaking power. That energy hit them like a guillotine, and every single mercenary froze, couldn't move an inch. One of them snapped, shocked, and swore he pulled it off using nothing but magical power. He was absolutely not some run-of-the-mill nobleman. He barreled up to Ram and demanded they scramble out of here right now. One of them lunged to grab him and keep him from going. But he shot back with a brutally displeased look. He unleashed lightning magic and slammed it down like a thunderbolt, every mercenary scrambling to snatch them. Then one by one, they broke off and started drifting away. And that sudden flash of magic lit up the whole town like a warning flare. People poured in, and soon the whole area was packed around the scene. Later, they trekked deep through the forest, step by step, into the wild unknown. But MC snapped his head toward them, like it happened in the blink of an eye. Then he roared at them all, begging for forgiveness. He admitted it was partly on him, then raced to apologize, saying he'd dragged them into trouble and even got them hurt. His friend snapped that he shouldn't say it, because this wasn't on him at all. Those who attacked them were the ones to blame. Ryasuk dropped into a deep bow and admitted, straight up, that he was the one who should apologize for the trouble he caused. He rang him up and warned, "Don't you dare bow your head." He blurted out the warning about the attack, threw himself between them and danger, and felt genuinely thankful he could keep them safe. Then he slammed together a whole room, like he was building a fortress in real time, and grilled them about what they planned to do next. Then Ryoma said, "He's sticking to the plan, so he's heading straight for San Angels. Do they all agree?" He even asked to tag along and begged them to go easy on him. They nodded in agreement, and Perm flashed a bright smile as she promised she'd be forever grateful for his kindness. He said, "So yeah, everyone rests today, and the break room app would handle the rest." So the whole crew could finally rest easy. He made sure everything was secure. Then the next morning, he fired up the coffee like clockwork. Ryasuk greeted him with a happy good morning, but the guy just shot back that it was way too early, so he told him to go ahead and sleep some more. He dug in and snapped that he was already wide awake, so there was no way he was going back to bed. He nodded like he finally got it, offered him coffee, and the guy grinned right back, cheerful as anything. He scanned the stuff piled on the table, then asked, "So if I want, I can pull anything I want from the earth?" The protagonist shot the idea down and said he can't have everything, then told everyone he just takes what he needs, one place at a time. But he's not chasing riches at all. He calls it useless and says if it were him, he'd dump the whole thing and rake in incredible money. Which MC called him out of nowhere and basically asked, "So, you're reincarnated, right?" He nodded and admitted that back in his old life, he died in an accident while shielding his girlfriend. But in this world, his parents ditched him the moment he was born, leaving him to grow up in the slums, until his sword skills lit up and August swooped in to take him under his wing. 30 years had already slammed by since he was reincarnated. If there was even a sliver of a chance, he'd jump at the chance to get back to Earth. And when he spoke, a heavy sadness twisted his face, and promised, "I get you," just to lift the weight off his chest, to cheer him up. Ryasuk leaned in and told him, "All right, now it's time. I'm gonna tell you about me." He caught his answer and stared in shock. "So you're into manga too?" He would grab every brand new manga volume the moment it dropped, but somehow, he'd nearly wiped the memories of all of them clean. "I can't wait to dive into something like that again." With a tiny smirk, he admitted that yes, he meant it, in fact. He clutched that very manga like it was pure treasure. He hauled in several thick volumes, and he was absolutely loaded with that intense drive. Still reeling, he blurted out loud that this was exactly it. It's wild, he can reread it again and again, like it's impossible to get tired of. Later, the rest of the team burst in and joined them. Wished them good morning and fire off. "So what are you doing here?" He told me about this wild kind of book called manga, then leaned in closer and said he couldn't even make out the letters, because the pictures were so insanely beautiful. Permy burst into the room right after that. Then everything went from bad to worse. They snatched the manga he handed them and started flipping through it right away. Rage flared in him and he snapped it out loud. He said, "All right, time to hit the road," and told them they could binge the manga later, but the shock of what they heard nearly knocked them out. And right after that, they admitted they'd totally blanked out the whole idea of time. Then they just kept going. They pushed on and after what felt like forever, finally tore through the distance and reached the capital. They spun around the city eyes wide, stunned by everything they saw. He strode ahead and told them to track down a place. They agreed to stay for the night and wolf down today's food. Then he leaned in and asked, "But before any of that happens, they should swing by the Adventurers Guild in this kingdom first, after all." He'd come all this way for one thing, an audience with the king. He wanted to send word ahead and score a clean pass through the guild. Roma nodded and said, "Yeah, we just want to hunt down quests." Ruin said it was wild to meet the king himself, and the protagonist nodded, saying he was finally getting ready to start. To worry, the very next day he stormed out of his team. He figured the palace messenger wouldn't show up till afternoon, while everyone else had already vanished off to the guild for quests that morning. You might as well take a stroll around the city for now. He charged through a blazing gateway, where beastmen crowds filled the land. Thought this part of the city was That rundown, he snapped his head around, scanning the place like something was about to go down, and couldn't help wondering if they were just vagrants, drifting through life with no place to call home. Too many beastmen packed this place in. There was no breathing room. He bolted out of the area and tracked down. He planted himself in the middle of a crowded street, then snapped his gaze around as if he sensed trouble. And sure enough, he felt the path to the sea unfolding exactly as he predicted. Baker's Bat Guild was packed, with buzzing shops just waiting to be raided by hungry adventurers. He barged into a sales magic shop and couldn't stop wondering, was this place really stocked with magical stuff? Maybe he should grab a staff, or... An old woman slipped up behind him, closing in fast, and straight up asked if he was hunting for something specific. MC snapped around with wide-eyed shock, and her mind went, "Wait, she's straight out of a fairy tale witch." She leaned in and said, "Oh, and by the way, I'm not a witch." That hit him harder than before, and he blurted, "Wait, can you read minds?" She swore it didn't happen, said she only imagined the whole thing, so tell me, what the heck is he hunting for? He finally cooled off and said he didn't have a staff or anything for magic, so now he was staring at the store like, "What are they selling here?" She understood him. He pulled out a magic wand and went, "So, how's this one?" Kids like him are perfect for swinging those short wands. That magic wand rubbed him the wrong way, and he couldn't stand it. She stepped up with the other staves at the stand and asked him, then asked if he'd maybe want to try this one. It's a staff carved from sacred wood, grown only in the holy land of Lugrade, and it can heal the... He shoved the charm into his hands, and just like that, it erupted into a blinding, glowing light, scorching the darkness away. This snap grabbed the old woman's attention, and she blurted that he was the very first person to react like this to it. Staff, it was like a majestic deity had stepped into the world, and Ryoma couldn't stop worrying about it. He shoved it into her hands and snapped that it was way too attention-grabbing, so chances were he'd have to declo. Does she even have a water elemental staff? Because I swear that's what we're about to see. Later. She handed him a staff and told him, "This is the one. Forged from the very bones of the sea dragon Leviathan. It supercharges your water magic spells, making them hit harder and last longer." The second she touched that staff, a surge of power blasted through her, and she said the staff. Math is a total wildcard, but somehow it's finally stopped fighting him. Does he want it? He nodded fast, then she hit him with the price. 400,000 Venus. He stared in shock like the numbers just punched him in the gut. Driven by what he heard and what his mind instantly believed, he figured he'd stumbled onto a fortune. He was absolutely obsessed with it, and even after that, he kept handing over mountains of gold bars. He bolted out of the store and she told him, "Come by any time you want." Down the street, he clocked the crowd. People stared right at him, like something about him was pulling their eyes. He slipped it into his inventory and realized, just like that, he'd instantly started standing out. Later, he finally reached the castle. Jafer rushed up to him and said everything was set for the audience, then looked him in the eye and demanded he come with him. The main character stormed in, heart-pounding, convinced he'd finally scored an audience with the king. He stormed into the king's hall, dropped into a deep bow, and spoke with sharp respect. He storms toward his castle, and the moment he arrives, the king welcomes him with open arms, because he's the 34th ruler of the kingdom, Luiro Fendel Gorardi Ferrand. He was so shocked he blurted out, "Hold up, raise your head." You could tell they were thrilled by the warm welcome, and they genuinely hoped they could forge a real, lasting connection. He lifted his chin and said, "After this, I can't even imagine asking for more, so please don't be." He grabbed the chance, eyeing the royal palace whenever he wanted, then thanked him with a grin and promised he'd be thrilled to take him up on that offer. With a bright, joyful grin, he asked what he'd say about sticking around for dinner tonight, maybe even sharing a meal with his family. He barely started before he immediately nodded along and said yes. Then after that, they headed to dinner together in the hall, and the feast stretched all the way until evening. After that, he stormed out of the palace and declared, "You've shown me real honor this time," then made it clear he was counting on even more goodwill from them next. Then he reached the carriage, shaking with nerves as he admitted he was terrified of the crowd and Forge thanked him for all his trouble, promising he'd ride with him all the way into the city. Or maybe he'd escort them straight to the king's gift. Then he remembered getting it earlier and blurted that he wanted to be taken there right now. They burst into the right place, right on the mark, and he froze in shock when he laid eyes on a massive red residence. He stood right beside it and a grin spread across his face. They say one of the earlier kings built it ages ago, so long back it became known as the Palace of Marsup. He stepped inside, and servants rushed to greet him. One of them even blurted that they'd been counting the moments until his arrival. Sandvatter's the one in charge of the entire palace, overseeing the butlers and commanding every servant within its walls. The servants stay here full-time, keep everything under control so he can move in right away. Plus, they'll handle the rest of his needs too, including taking care. He checks if he's got any personal needs, or if the MC has any requests. Then the MC sprints up the stairs, already thinking, with a scale this huge asterisk, he'd just end up drowning here, all alone. So he marched up to the servants and offered a polite bow. Told him, "I've got one request for you." He told them exactly what he wanted, and then, after a while, his comrades marched into this palace. Then Roma yanked him aside and said, "We've come a long way." Ruin stared around and muttered, "So this is it, the place I wanted them to reach, this palace? Or is there something hiding here?" Everyone froze when he said it. Yeah, this is his mansion. The king handed it to him himself. They rushed inside, scanned the place, and demanded, "What are you even talking about? This is unbelievable." Then, no kidding, this is straight-up magnificent. Is he really going to live here? He grinned and said he just wanted to see them, so he kept it all a secret. The food's already waiting, so kick back, make yourself at home. He dug up the memories and realized, yep, it was him. He'd told Mr. Sandvatter to get everything ready for the reception. After that, they all sat down together and crushed dinner, then took a. He splashed in the bath and kicked back with board games, and then bye. They squeezed into the same table, and Ryoma promised, "I've got rooms ready for you. Stay as long as you want, and if you feel like it, you can even move in with me." The guy on the team flat out refused, saying staying here felt like too much, and he just needed a simpler room, because even he knew he'd be a bundle of nerves the whole time. Permy beamed and declared she wanted to live here, because this palace was straight-up magnificent, a luxury so unreal it felt like a fairy tale. Rome shot it down, insisting they'd be better off dropping in only once in a while Ruin scoffed that it'd feel totally weird to head to the guild from right here. She was fuming about it, and the guys immediately assumed they'd somehow gotten tangled up in a super important. After a while, the team finally peeled out of the mansion, thanked him for the time, and admitted it was a blast, because they had to jump right back into their adventures. The protagonist told them, "Come visit me sometime. I've got way too much space for just one person," and they nodded along, cool and calm. With a super excited grin, Permy nodded hard, blurted out loud that they'd come back to him for sure, and promised to do it again. Then he bolted back into the palace. I saw Ryasuke sprawled on the couch and asked, "Are you still here?" He nodded, then shot back, "Do you have money?" So, does Hivet got any more manga for him? He yanked out his phone, promised he'd be back, and figured, yeah, this was exactly why he stayed behind. He ripped back from subspace with a fresh new manga in hand. Then the two of them plopped down to read the manga. Later, he started strapping on his armor, and Ryasuke stood right beside him, firing off a quick question, "Where are you headed?" He nodded and snapped, "Look, if I don't warm up, my skills will rust." Then he turned toward the guild, hunting for any job that looks worth the fight. The MC asked if they could hit the dungeon together, and when he heard that idea, he instantly agreed. Then he got dressed too, locked in on one thought. He just wanted to take on the dungeon and prove himself, and still get revenge while he's at it. He'll also finish the quest God gave him to rake in even more points. They stormed out of the palace, and Ryasuke followed right on their heels. They said we had to start by digging up intel from the guild first, then. But when they finally reached the guild, Guildmaster Begward stepped forward, smiled, and told them he'd just bestowed upon them the great honor of his greeting, handing them the job as the king's go-between. That honor lit up his face, and now he couldn't wait to see how he could help today. Ryoma told everyone he was itching to dive into a nearby dungeon and asked for all the details. He nodded along and said, "Listen, there are 4 dungeons out here. First up is Rafsha Pastor, this massive, grassy wasteland packed with monsters whose meat you can actually eat, and people call it the Meat Dungeon. Next up is the huge salt lake called Faldusel, where monster-like fish lurk, and you can haul out a massive stash of salt from its shores. Third on the list is the Tower of the Sage Far. Monsters come roaring in with magic blasts, And if you survive, you can snag grimoires and powerful magical gear. Finally, here comes the fourth one, the Gastel Empire. Those monsters that show up are all undead. Immortality turned them into something that shouldn't walk at all. Only holy magic can take them down, and it's brutally hard to pull off, so right now, that giant holy seal of the church keeps them trapped for now. But if the master gets the chance, they're praying he'll break through this one stuck obstacle for good. Engine, Ryoma swallowed hard and admitted to himself with a bitter ache that the undead still scared him just a little. Right then, Meshafim hit him with a message out of nowhere. Some guy swore the Gastel Empire dungeon was packed with treasure and told him, "Go there," then slapped him with dungeon quests. But he hated it, thinking, if he's pushing me to go. And with that, he had no choice but to call it for today. Then he'd just stretch his legs and be done. Check out the other dungeons. Then later, they tore off to a whole new place. Ryosuke spotted a towering stone column and snapped that it was the entrance to Raftio's pasture. Then he stepped right up, stared it down, and muttered, "So that's it. That pillar is the entrance, right?" He sniffed the air and instantly said it smelled ridiculously pleasant. A bunch of adventurers huddled right by this spot, cooking up their next meal like it was survival or nothing. Then the two of them charged straight into the dungeon, and he stared at massive open fields, with one gigantic tree looming on the horizon like a warning. He spun around and said that wherever he looked, all he could see were endless meadows. Then Ryasuke squinted into the distance and pointed out one towering tree far away. The protagonists stare right there too, and so, first they've got to reach that tree, like right away, so they can use the lamp. Mark and the others stepped toward that tree. Then, right as they did, he caught a sudden, ear-splitting noise in the distance. He whirled around and demanded what it was, then shot a side glance and shouted that it was a herd of Genu Burko. He reached into his bag, pulled out a staff, and said, "This is where it all started."